Morning begins with a soft inventory of hinges. On streets where bougainvillea slips its color over fences and steps, the first metallic syllables of the day are quiet, a latch lifted, a hasp tested, a pin rocked gently in its eye. People do not approach their shutters as if waking a sleeping beast. They greet them like old companions who know their place in the household's choreography. Each panel is an archive of seasons, pale scars where a screwdriver once slipped, a darkening along the lower stiles where fingers habitually pull, a ghostly square where the sun's paint has never quite touched. To an outsider, they are mere boards. To the island, they are lids for the home's eyes, blinking shut with calm assurance when the air advisors rest. Before anything is tightened, someone listens. The wood gives back a small report of how the night went. Dry, a little thirsty along the end grain. Not swollen, not stubborn. The breeze lifts, then sets a curtain down as if laying a bookmark. A pencil emerges to note which panel is due for a dab of oil after the season, which hinge wants a reminder to be replaced when the shops are quiet again. Readiness here is full of later notes that only become possible because today's work is unhurried. To move too fast is to forget the small wisdoms that make future days easier, like keeping the best screws in a tin with a lid that bites shut, like saving the worn but still honest brace that fits the kitchen window's particular bite-dot cross braces weight in a neat stack, each one marked in pencil with its partner window, north bedroom, garden door, back gallery. They have been sanded over years into a familiarity that hands recognize without looking. They are not heavy, only truthful. They carry the weight of purpose rather than bulk. When a brace lifts, it rides the air in a shallow arc that never startles. The sound of its landing against a frame is a low, certain thunk, the kind of sound that reassures animals and children alike. Nails are not the first resort. Pilot holes, a patient hand. And screws that seat cleanly are favored because they can be unseated just as cleanly when the sky remembers itself and breathes again. Houses here speak in pastel. They were once lime-washed in tones that the sea seemed to approve, and many remain faithful to that palette, a blue that learned restraint from the harbour at noon, a green with a trace of plant and leaf, a yellow that knows not to shout. Against these colours, wood reads as an honest sentence written in a simple hand. It is not show. It is grammar, nouns and verbs of shelter, prepositions of in front of and behind, conjunctions of and then and meanwhile. A brace is an and then. A hasp is a meanwhile. A shutter is both subject and object depending on whether the house is being looked at or doing the looking. It is a kind of quiet literacy that anyone who has tightened a strap over a truck bed or tied a line around a dinghy already understands. The first brace goes up where the wind most loves to test its ideas. This is known not from a map, though the map agrees, but from the memory of rain that once crept under a sill here and left a thin flour of salt when it dried. The step-stool finds its place. Someone steadies it not because it is wobbly, but because steadiness is better shared. The screw bites and curls a bright shaving that falls into a waiting hand. No need to find it on the floor later with a bare foot. The head seats flush. There is no flourish, no final twist for show. The talk is what it needs to be and no more. Wood prefers promises kept without boasting. Across the lane, a neighbour works the old way, with a family brace and bit that belonged to a grandfather. The slow, circular motion looks like thought made visible. Press, turn, breathe. Press, turn, breathe. He will be teased with affection for using the museum tool, but no one is in a hurry to end such rituals. They hold history close to the surface where the present can learn from it. When a gust comes from the wrong quarter or a storm slows to gather in place, a person who is drilled by feel knows the difference between a board that is truly seated and one that only pretends. That knowledge has been paid for in long afternoons and long nights and is not easily startled out of a body. Doorways are considered next, not barricaded, but encouraged to behave. A diagonal plank crosses a door like a soothing hand across a brow, reminding the frame to stay square. On the floor, a small wedge that lives behind the shoe rack returns to its little duty, sliding snug beneath the corner that once insisted on lifting under a southerly push. The house and its keepers share these inside jokes. places where the structure shows personality and the family answers back with a quirk of craft. The jokes are never at the expense of safety. They are the way affection expresses itself in joinery and shims. Children are invited to pass screws, to mark a board with a pencil line, to hold the light. The lamp is not needed in daylight, but the habit is the lesson. We see what we are doing. We make sure others can see too. Someone points out why the grain runs this way rather than that, why the brace spans the long diagonal, why the lower screw is always the one that gets its coat of wax first. These are not performances. They are rehearsals for future competence. The children will one day tap a barometer on their way out the door and know why 1/8 of an inch matters. They will one day reach for the right tin without looking. By late morning, most shutters have found their settled posture. They do not slam shut. They meet their frames like old friends leaning into a familiar embrace. The street view changes almost not at all, only a shift in the angle of slats here, a narrowed eye there, a newly polite line where a brace makes itself quietly known. Inside, light sifts through gaps in long, even stripes that move slowly as the sun organizes itself into afternoon. Air still comes, but it is curated, a measured flow that keeps rooms from feeling like boxes and keeps the mind from climbing the walls. Sound changes, too. The world becomes slightly more upholstered. The bird calls round their edges. A motor on the hill loses its bite and becomes a hum one could nap to. There is a practical poetry in how tools are returned to their places between tasks. The screwdriver does not go wandering into the fruit bowl. The longer bit returns to its clip. The electrical tester, which today will likely be for show only, lies atop the tidy roll of tape where, if needed later, it can be reached without conversation. A brush takes a lazy pass at the sill to gather what sawdust there was. It empties into a bin that already holds the season's first palm seeds. Palm seeds, the island's own gentle reminder that nothing stays still, not even in the hush before weather.by mid-afternoon. A final walk is made around the exterior. The handle on the rail, the eyes lifted to check the line of the fascia, the small pleasure of a gutter that shows no dramatic sag. A note is made. After the season, the gutter bracket near the mango tree will want company. And because notes have a way of escaping, the pencil marks it inside the lid of the tin where the good screws live. The lid will tell the truth when memory grows breezy. A neighbor leans on the fence just long enough to compare lists, both of them too polite to call them lists. They are simply things to remember, and remembering is, here, a shared art. Supper will be easy tonight and early. Bread and something simple. The house is already leaning toward evening, its slatted eyes narrower, its door quieter on its hinges. The braces do not look like armor. They look like patience. If the wind comes, it will find no gestures to challenge, only the composure of weight arranged against it. If the wind passes, as it often does, it will leave with nothing to brag about. Either way, the grammar holds. Subject meets verb. Strength meets direction. And the sentence the house writes, slowly, with wood, with practice, reads the same as it has for many seasons. We are at home. We are prepared without drama. We will open again. Evening lowers itself over the harbour like a quilt, and the water turns the colour of brushed pewter. In the lanes between pastel houses, the breeze slows, then slows again, as if the island were holding its breath in a long, even pause. It is not a dramatic pause. It is not the beginning of panic or the cue for hurried footsteps. It is simply the practiced calm that comes to the Caribbean before a storm season swell, a hush that has visited these shores for generations. A hush that people recognize in their bones the way sailors recognize a familiar lighthouse by the tilt of its lantern. On front steps and verandas, the watch begins. No one announces it. No one sets a bell. Yet almost every eye turns, now and then, to the horizon. The light at sea has a certain polish in this hour. Edges grow sharper even as colors mute, and distances seem to slide a little closer than they were at noon. If you ask the old fishers about this clarity, they will shrug and say it has always been so, a trick of humidity, a certain alignment of sun and cloud that arrives when the pressure starts to nudge downward. They do not use the word barometer first, though many have one nailed near a doorway, the brass ring gently smudged by hands that tap it in passing. They will speak instead of signs, the slow wings of frigate birds sketching low loops, the way dogs elect to sleep indoors without coaxing, the faint iodine tang that travels farther inland than usual. In kitchens, stoves go quiet after the evening meal, and lids find their pots with careful, soft clicks. The dishes can wait. Someone turns the old radio on for a moment, not to fill the room with sound, but to check for the measured voice from the weather office. Latitudes and longitudes come like coordinates from a map that has visited every mind on the island since childhood. 13 north, 61 west, moving WNW at a patient, almost courteous pace. Sea height, wind strength, central pressure. These are not alarming numbers here. They are the ingredients of a story that people already know how to read. To a visitor, they might sound like a puzzle. To the island, they are a lullaby of caution. On a tabletop, a pencil rests beside a folded sheet listing call signs and phone numbers. The names are steady and familiar. Auntie Sal, Mr. Jules from the far end of the bay, the clinic, the shelter caretaker whose spare key lies in a tin on a shelf just above the kettle. The phone will not be needed tonight, and likely not tomorrow, but the list sits where it can be reached without rummaging. Much of Readiness is not about action. It is about the relief of knowing that action would be simple if it were required. The list is there the way a lamp sits on a nightstand, reassuring even when it stays dark. Children whisper at windows, asking if a storm is truly coming. The adults let their answers be measured and plain. Yes, there is weather out there. Yes, we will do the same things we always do. Check the shutters. Put fresh batteries in the torches. Bring the small plants off the gallery floor. And move the bucket under the drip on the north side, because that corner always finds a way to welcome a little rain. Someone mentions the year when the mango tree gave up a limb in a gust, and everyone laughs quietly at how the limb had insisted on being brought inside to dry, as if it were a guest. The memory does not glamorize danger. It domesticates it, a little, by folding it into the ordinary fabric of household story. The elders remember older watches. They talk in a slow cadence about seasons before satellite loops and phone alerts, when the shape of cloud stacks over the rim of the sea could send a runner down the road. The color vocabulary was different then, not Doppler greens and reds, but the pearl grey belly of a cloud that carried sand in its teeth, the iron blue heave of a sky that promised a long night, the off-white that meant rain wrapped itself around wind. Yet the essence of the watch was the same: attention without agitation, ritual without spectacle. Even now, with 1,000 images available at a fingertip, the island still trusts the feel of air and the way the day's heat refuses, suddenly, to leave the body. When the skin will not cool, when the hammock does not sway, when the scent of the reef arrives before the tide, people nod and say, quietly, it is time to see to things. A few houses away, a door creaks open and a neighbor steps out with a coil of line over one shoulder, then stops, listening. Crickets are clean in the hedges. Tree frogs begin their glassy chorus. There is no urgency in his pause. He is inventorying the evening sounds, making sure all the expected players have taken their places. In this inventory, silence has a role as well. The absence of the usual late motor on the road, or the absent clink of bottles from the shop, tells its own small truths. In the Caribbean, Readiness is a choir of small truths, harmonized over time. The radio yields another brief bulletin. The voice does not quicken, and the words do not harden. A track is projected, a cone drawn out across an ocean that has known many such chalk marks. People are not naive about the uncertainties. They do not mistake the graphic for a promise. They simply tuck the projection into the drawer of their thoughts, alongside what they felt when they stepped outside, alongside the taste of salt on the wind and the way the casuarina needles lay still against the fence. The drawer closes quietly. There will be more bulletins later. There is no need to hover. Someone reaches up and clicks the radio off, not with impatience, but with gratitude for the steady tone of the announcer, who understands that a calm voice fortifies roofs almost as well as nails. In the harbour, the masts barely tick. A dinghy's painter rubs the quay with a small, polite squeak. Farther out, A buoy knocks a rhythm that anyone on shore could whistle if asked. The marina light paints a thin path out into the slip, and that path seems as solid as a pier. Everything is poised. The watch is not a single hour. It is a stringing together of many small, deliberate minutes in which nothing dramatic happens because the point is to keep drama far away. A window shade is lowered half a handspan. A note is left on a neighbor's gate. "I'll check your back door in the morning." A crate that usually sits by the steps spends the night indoors. If an observer took a photograph of the town at dusk and another at midnight, they might struggle to spot the differences. Yet inside those differences lies the entire craft of living with where the .be by the time the stars arrive fully, the island has settled into its listening posture. Not anxious, not careless, simply attentive. This is how it has always begun, and how it will begin again after this season, and the next, with people who know their place on the shore and their part in the long conversation between wind and wall. The watch runs on tea, on patience, on the settled knowledge that a steady hand tonight makes for an easier morning when the work begins. Doors close softly. Latches rest. Breath deepens. The horizon, still exact and polished, receives the last looks of the day. Then the houses exhale together, and the island sleeps, one ear open, as it always does, to the long, small music of the sea. In a corner of the yard where the ground knows to stay level, a blue drum waits with the patience of a moonlit harbour. Its lid, wide and sure, leans against the wall like a shield off duty. A hose finds the drum's lip, and the first stream of water arrives with a hush, not a splash, the sound a seashell might make if it preferred privacy. The filling is not rushed. It is measured, the way a lullaby is measured, steady, even, with pauses to watch the meniscus rise and steady again. Someone lifts the lid to check for a clean interior, not because they doubt the drum, but because habit here runs on the quiet pleasure of certainty. A clean cloth, folded small, waits to wipe the rim before the seal returns. When the lid settles and the ring bites closed with its round, definitive click, the whole yard seems to deepen by a shade of blue inside. The pantry practices geometry. Shelves stack into planes. Tins file themselves into quiet rows. Jars stand like respectful tourists in a museum of staples. Each food has its temperament. Rice likes dryness and a container that will not bargain with ants. Beans take well to glass where their freckles can be admired without announcing themselves to weevils. Flour, which is always ready to travel in the smallest breeze, is happiest when a scoop lives inside the bin to spare the hand from improvisational digging. Labels tell stories in pencil, dates, quantities, a note about where the last good price was found, because pencil forgives updates and panic never improves handwriting. At the back, a box of sachets and small comforts rests. Tea, bouillon, a pinch of nutmeg to make a simple pot taste like a remembered afternoon. Water is both simple and particular here. The island knows it in three moods: sweet in the cistern, briny in the sea, and skyborn on the roof in that soft rush that would flood the gutters if not given direction. Before storms, the cistern is a quiet purse of confidence. If it is clean, if the gutters were tended when the breadfruit leaves began to fall, if the first flush diverter remembers its manners. People learn these IFS, the way a carpenter learns the personality of tools. They are not criticisms, only the small courtesies that keep a system graceful. A hand runs along the gutter's line and finds no dramatic slump. A downspout's coupling gets a nod. The screen over the rainhead, brushed free of seeds last week, blushes with approval. When rain comes, it will be invited, not allowed. Not every house has a cistern, and not every cistern drinks from a perfect roof. This is fine. Readiness leans on redundancy. In the kitchen, jugs accumulate like a quiet choir, each ready to carry its part. Some are store-bought in their dignified plastic, rinsed and set to one side with caps resting loose until needed. Others are glass, thrift and chosen for a certain domestic poetry, the kind of jar that likes to host lemonade in calmer months. A few clay pots sit where air can turn around them. Their coolness is old knowledge that still works in heat. Out in the yard, the blue drums line up their volume like a row of gentle shoulders. The arithmetic that follows is private but familiar. This drum is so many gallons, this jug another few. A day needs this much for drinking, that much for cooking. Washing will wait for a bucket and a slower rhythm. The arithmetic does not judge. It simply adds and, in adding, pacifies. Cleanliness has a soft chemistry that reaches for practical grace. A small bottle of unscented bleach lives in a basket with its own careful label and a measuring spoon. The spoon is not there to be strict. It is there to spare the mind from estimating when the air is heavy and a person is tired. The ratio, so many drops per litre, so many teaspoons per drum, has been looked up and copied, laminated, and clipped to a string that hangs where it can be found without thinking. Boiling, too, is ready in its way, a pot that knows it may be called on to be a small spring. Matches wait in a jar that keeps the damp at a distance. The gas cylinder, tested in the morning with a touch of soapy water at the valve, sits in its strap like a faithful animal. Ventilation is not an idea. It is an open louver, a door propped with a wedge that, like all wedges here, has a specific place it prefers to live when not on duty. Food for storms is both constraint and possibility. The island larder is practiced in making dignity from staples. Saltfish enjoys a long soak in a bowl big enough to host its return to sweetness. Plantains, some green, some leaning toward yellow, stand by like a row of well-behaved notes on a staff. Cassava waits for a hand that has peeled it 100 times. Breadfruit, with its honest heft, receives a glance that estimates ripeness without ceremony. Canned coconut milk carries an ocean of recipes in a small, obliging cylinder. A can opener sits right beside it, because an opener found at once tastes better than one found after 3 drawers. Peppers, onions, a small clutch of limes, they are not luxuries, though they grant that illusion when the kitchen is otherwise a catalogue of tins. They are the punctuation in sentences of rice and beans, the commas that let simple pots breathe. Pantry thinking has a tempo that prefers mornings. Heat is not an enemy, but it is a fact, and facts are easier to befriend before noon. A hand reaches for what will be cooked if the grid naps. One-pot meals that forgive the flare of a small flame or the insistence of a variable breeze. A pressure cooker, if the family likes it, hums like a quiet drum and saves fuel. If not, a heavy pot with a lid will do like an old friend who never once mentions being taken for granted. Thermoses stand ready to keep things hot without the constant whisper of gas. Solar cookers exist here and there, more as experiments than habits. But the idea is understood, that the sun can be invited to help even as its cousin in weather gathers ideas offshore. Cold will be scarce if the power steps away for a while, and so ice is made now, not later. Trays line up in the freezer like a parade of small skies, and bottles half filled and laid sideways will offer long drinks that cool more slowly and last longer. Coolers clean themselves today with a cloth that knows the corners, and a block of ice, the kind that shrinks with dignity, not the kind that vanishes in an hour, earns a place if it can be found. The order here is not militaristic. It just feels good to imagine tomorrow being easy because today was attentive. Pests receive their own diplomacy. Ants dislike certain jars with tight gaskets more than they dislike the owners of those jars. Bay leaves, old sailors in the spice fleet, find their way into rice tins and swear, with some success, to discourage visitors. If a weevil is discovered despite all this courtesy, it is noticed without drama and the container retires itself to the far corner where such matters are sorted. Readiness is not ruined by a tiny failure. It reshapes around it like a river around a clean stone. Water, even more than food, teaches kindness toward future selves. Jugs are dated. The drum nearest the door carries a chalk mark that says use first, because reaching for the nearest thing is human, and making the nearest the right thing is wisdom. Taste is considered. Some plastics give a whisper of their own to water if left too long in sun. So a cloth shades the drum and a wall with a habit of shade offers its generosity. Glass is a little heavier in the hand but makes the mouth happier after 3 days. Clay cools the air around it and speaks politely to the water within. None of this is fussness. It is a collection of small mercies offered ahead of time, which is the essence of this season's art. Hygiene finds its simple theatre near a basin that knows it will be asked to do more than usual. Soap rests in a tray that drains. A clean towel has a hook that is actually used. A bucket under the table has a date on its lid and a job. to be the apprentice to the tap if the tap decides not to work for a while. Grey water, that second-hand generosity, has a path. It will see the garden or the steps, not the inside of the house. A small bottle of hand sanitizer sits where hands that have just handled rope or shutter can find it without hunting. It is not a talisman. It is a convenience, which is its own kind of kindness. When the day grows long, community threads itself through these preparations like a quiet strand you only notice when the light hits a certain way. Someone has extra jugs. Someone else has a spare ring for a drum whose latch broke last season and was forgotten in the relief that followed. A neighbour's list includes the name of an elder whose cistern can be a companion to 3 households if the mains disappoint. The point is not to say who owes whom. The point is to say that water tastes better when the island remembers to be one place rather than many fences. By late afternoon. Lids are tightened, shelves breathe, and the arithmetic has resolved to a comfortable sum. There is enough, not everything, not extravagance, simply enough in a shape that will be easy to use when the house is quieter and the street goes soft. The drums by the wall lean into their blue, and the pantry leans into its order. A kettle boils a last time before evening, and a cup is poured that tastes faintly of a lime and certainty. Outside, the hose is coiled without insistence, and a single drop clings to its cut end like a punctuation mark. Tomorrow, perhaps, the list will ask for 1 more jug, a plug of wax for the drum ring, a packet of tea to replace what was brewed for today's small ceremony. For now, the lid's click still echoes lightly in the mind, a round, reassuring sound that says the simplest things, when tended with care, can hold a household steady through a restless night. The radio does not announce itself as a hero. It sits with the quiet humility of a teapot, an appliance whose true power is steadiness. On many islands, the favoured set is not the newest. Its case may be scuffed where a hand has carried it to the gallery 100 evenings. Its telescoping antenna with a gentle kink halfway up like the healed bone of a bird's wing. The dial knows where to land. Fingers find the same notch they found last season and the one before, and a small surge of static gives way to a voice that speaks the language of weather without the drama of spectacle. It is a particular tone, measured, precise, humane, born of a long tradition of telling people what they need to know in a manner that lets them sleep until it is time to work. The cadence of the bulletin is almost liturgical, a date, a time, a center position, a motion expressed in the patient words of degrees and knots. There are numbers that would look cold on a screen but feel almost warm here, carried by a familiar announcer whose name many households know, if only by the way he clears his throat before sea heights. He speaks of swells and periods, of bands and shear, of advisories that slide up and down a scale whose rungs are practical, not cinematic. Children overhear the words the way they once overheard recipes, not with immediate comprehension, yet with the understanding that these sequences are how adults keep the house in one piece. The radio's volume is modest. It doesn't need to command a room. It needs to share it. Alongside the radio, on a table that shows a lifetime of cups, rests a laminated map. It is not clever. Its power is the blunt clarity of land and water drawn in proportion. Some households prefer a wall map creased from folding and refolding. Others keep a small atlas in a kitchen drawer next to the corkscrew. The map is not a prophecy. It is a companion for thinking, a way to let the mind's finger trace the arc of possibility without persuading itself that it has learned the future. People mark it tenderly, not with permanent ink but with a pencil that tolerates revision, the way weather tolerates nothing so much as the revision of its own intentions. The pencil has already written other things today. It dates the water jug and initials the gas cylinder's pressure. Now it draws a tiny circle near one coordinate and a faint line that bows to the west by a day's travel. At the map's edges, 2 or 3 phone numbers are penciled in small block letters. The clinic, the shelter, a cousin who lives inland where the valley gathers a different kind of wind. The handwriting is not decorative. It is polite, clear enough to be read by anyone who might come through the door and find themselves the adult in the room for a few minutes. That is part of the ethics of preparedness here. Make the next person's job easy. Whether that person is you at 2 in the morning or a neighbor with kind hands who came to borrow a wrench and stayed to hold the ladder, lists accumulate in the season, but not in a way that encumbers the mind. Each list lives in a sensible place and has a reasonable ambition. The tool list is short and honest. Screwdriver, driver bits, a headlamp with a strap that does not pinch, spare screws in 2 lengths, a tape that returns to its case without sulking. The comfort list is truer than it sounds. Tea, the last of the good chocolate, a paperback that doesn't mind getting a little salt on its corners. The contact list keeps its dignity by being clean and current. Names are spelled correctly. Numbers are verified without ceremony. The elderly neighbor's line is tested at twilight when conversation feels natural and not like rehearsal. "We have your key in the tin," someone says. "We'll check your back door after we do ours." These are not theatrics. They are the low, sustaining notes of community. Batteries are a culture of their own. They prefer to be rotated and treated like guests who will be staying a while. A small plastic case keeps the fresh ones from fraternizing with the used. A marker leaves a tiny date on the side. Nothing accusatory, just the kind of note that future you reads with a little gratitude. Rechargeables exist in some households. Their chargers clip to a strip that will be asked to do too much when the grid returns and tries to make up for lost time. Hand crank radios are admired with an affection that borders on poetry, but even they like to find a pair of AA friends if the night grows long. There is an art to how information flows through a house. Not everyone wants headlines, and not all hours should carry them. The radio is checked at agreed-upon times, not hovered over like a pot that stubbornly refuses to boil because it dislikes being watched. Morning, mid-afternoon, late evening, the voice arrives like a tide, regular enough that no one needs to ask, "Should we check?" The answer is built into the day. When new advisories warrant it, the rhythm adjusts, never with a clatter, always with the same courtesy the island extends to the sea when it asks to speak more loudly. Phones are tools here, not talismans. Signal is a gift that cannot be ordered, and so the choreography accounts for that fact. Devices are charged in the generous hours. Low power habits are dusted off like reliable sweaters. Airplane mode is learned anew by those who forgot where to find it. A small power bank lives where the keys do, and it is fed alongside the phones. People exchange brief texts whose wording has the friendliness of postcards and the efficiency of lists. All good here. Radio at 9. Need anything from shop? The replies carry no emojis this week, and yet the tone is somehow more expressive than any cartoon face dot on some porches. The map gains company, a notebook whose pages are not dramatic, dots for rainfall on Tuesday. Another dot for the second drum topped off. A small star next to the neighbor's promise to share their generator if the freezer pines for attention. This record is not for posterity. It is for the next 72 hours, which, in the hush before weather, can feel like both a long time and not nearly long enough. If the storm changes its mind and becomes only a lesson, the notebook will go back to being a ledger for plantings or a place to put a poem that arrives unannounced. When the breadfruit tree drops one of its ancient seasons onto the lawn, the sound design of a house in Readiness has room for quiet marvels. Between bulletins, the radio yields to the natural orchestra, the nylon hum of a line tightened properly on a flagpole, the conversational click of a lizard across the gallery's paint, the soft, almost bureaucratic sigh of a louver that has been slanted to just the right angle. The map does not rustle. It breathes. The pencil returns to its place with the same tidy satisfaction as a spoon finding the right drawer. These details matter not because they would rescue anyone if the wind were to come, but because they knit the mind to its tasks without tangling it. When visitors ask why everyone seems so unafraid, the answer is not courage, not really. It is rehearsal. Fear is allowed its chair at the table, but it is not allowed to lead the meeting. The chair at the head belongs to practice, to the radio's cadence, to the map's humility, to lists that feel like kindness. People who have watched many seasons learn a paradox that they pass to the young, that niceness in preparations, tidy handwriting, clean batteries, the courtesy of a laminated chart, does not mean naivety. It means respect for the work you will ask your future self to do in a room that flickers and a wind that bangs. It means that when the knock comes, the house will not leap up and overturn its chair. It will stand, straighten its shirt, and open the door to weather with a posture that says, We have done what we could, and we will keep doing it. Even the uncertainties find their places on the table. Forecast cones widen and narrow, tracks tilt and sway, models disagree like old friends at a domino table who nonetheless know when to slap the winning tile. The island does not choose a favorite model and sneer at the rest. It lets plurality be a form of prudence. It is a kind of intellectual hospitality. If 5 reasonable maps contradict one another, perhaps the reasonable thing is to prepare for the family resemblance among them rather than bet the roof on a single face. So the lists do not choose drama over diligence. Rope is coiled. The yard is read for flying arguments and asked to quiet itself. The radio is thanked for its steadiness, for its voice. The map is folded with the kind of care that recognizes that paper, like people, lasts longest when handled without impatience. When evening comes and the last bulletin of the day steps down from the air, the house returns to its breathing. The radio's antenna retracts with its modest click and looks suddenly fragile, like a reed by a pond. The map rests beneath the clear vinyl mat that keeps coffee cups from leaving their conversational rings. The lists sit where they sat before, not like orders from a high command, but like invitations to do the right thing at the right time without fuss. Someone lights a citronella coil because mosquitoes have their own agenda. Someone else puts a pencil behind the radio, an extra, in case the first goes wandering with the child who likes to draw frigate birds on butcher paper when the adults start talking about wind. Before the sea raises its voice, islanders speak to their boats. The conversation is old and courteous, a palm along a gunwale, a tug at a line, the little thrum that tells whether a knot has remembered its purpose. In harbours that have heard many seasons, the choreography begins without fanfare. Skippers appear at odd hours, not because urgency has tightened its fists, but because tides arrange time more elegantly than clocks. The rule is simple and generous. Everything that can be quieted should be quieted. Everything that can be made round and gentle should be made so. Wind loves edges and loose ideas. Preparedness trims both. Sails come down first, even from boats that swear they won't go out for a week. Dacron and canvas have their own temperaments. Pliable, brave, prone to telling stories if left where gusts can find them. So they are flaked, rolled, zipped, and stowed. Halyards are leashed away from the mast or lightly taped so they don't conduct a percussive symphony all night. A boat that clicks its rigging in a rising breeze is a creature asking to be argued with, and argument is energy better spent elsewhere. Biminis, dodges, and flags, anything with ambition in a gale, are folded like summer into winter and, for now, asked to sit quietly. On deck, winch handles have a place, not the rail. Chafe points, those small appetites boats have for eating their own lines, are fed with old fire hose or canvas wraps and a pragmatism that has no interest in romance. Whatever reduces friction is handsome enough. Lines multiply. A single bowline becomes a bowline with a spring that runs aft. The spring earns a twin that runs forward from the stern. Snubbers, if they exist, stop being theoretical and become instruments with a job. To stretch, to apologize for the sharpness of a jerk, to turn suddenness into something the hull can forgive. Cleats get their turns as if demonstrating knotwork for a child. Figure 8, a thoughtful hitch, the kind of security that doesn't lean on heroics. Fenders breathe between hull and key like slow lungs. If there are 3, 5 appear, and with them a rope that keeps them from wandering off to meditate against a neighbour's gelcoat. None of this is dramatic. The doubling, tripling, and fair leading of lines is a form of politeness extended to the future, and to the boats next door for vessels that will ride it out on their moorings, the checklists are practiced. Mooring pennants are flexed with a hand and an eye both. If a strand complains, it is replaced, not lectured. Shackles are inspected with the forgiveness of a teacher who still insists on correct answers. If clever's pins haven't seen a proper cotter lately, they are reacquainted. The connection to the block below is not taken on faith, it is felt for. With a look at the chafe guards where pennant meets bochock. With a longer look where the pennant vanishes into water that will briefly remember being taller. Some skippers rig a second pennant from a separate cleat, so that redundancy is not just a concept but a geometry on deck. Where moorings are suspect or wind fetch long. Anchors are set in partnership. a bow anchor that knows its bottom, sand, weed, or that stubborn mud that needs gentle persuasion. A stern hook to keep the boat's shoulders from swinging into trouble if the wind changes its mind at 3 in the morning. Scope, that plain arithmetic of anchor line to depth, is kinder when multiplied before rain and wind pull their own sums. Others go inland, not with their boats, but with their boat's faith. A mangrove creek with a reputation for keeping secrets becomes, in this season, a hurricane hole. It is not named for drama, but for the way the world pinches there into safety, root and mud and leaf absorbing motion the way a grandmother absorbs worry with a long story. In such places, lines run not just to cleats but into living trees that have been known for their good character. The wraps are generous and padded. Bark is not asked to pay for human caution. Boats point their bows in and settle like horses in a stable. The day is quiet even here. People prefer to finish before the afternoon's young gusts try to lend advice. For boats that come ashore, the yard hums with a tidy urgency. Trailers are checked with the tap of a hammer, bearings kissed with grease, straps examined for the kind of small nicks that grow ambitious in rain. Keels are cribbed, hulls blocked, stands chained together because a stand unchained is a polite fiction the wind doesn't believe. Cradles are tightened not to a tortured pitch but to a pressure that says not today to the idea of wandering. Anything that might flap becomes a promise instead. Hatches dogged. Doorades removed or turned to remember the weather's direction. Companionways closed with wedges that know their corners. Outboards tell their own chapter. Those small, stubborn masterpieces are unbolted from transoms and invited inside, not because theft is expected, though locks are not shy, but because 1/2 knots and a flying engine make bad poetry. The little engine gets a rinse, a cap of fuel treatment if there's time, a careful drain if there isn't, and a space on a rug where it can dream of placid mornings in a few days' time. Dinghies, those philosophical creatures that can be both lifeline and laundry basket, are flipped, drained, and tied in crossed lines that do not pull stupidly in the first gust. Valves are checked with the intimate tap-knowing of the knuckle. Inflatable seams are given a glance that is not mistrustful, only wise. On land, yards begin to reduce their sail area. This phrase, borrowed from boats, fits fences and gardens better than one might expect. Wind loves to hook its fingers around anything that feels like an invitation. The trick is to be politely uninviting. Ladders, those egotists always leaning into possibility, find themselves laid flat and lashed to something that will not entertain their acrobatics. Garbage bins, the original improvisational instruments, are brought inside or weighted with a bag of sand that refuses to dance. Loose zinc sheets, left over from a repair, stop leaning artistically and are persuaded to lie horizontal under crate. Laundry lines go slack for once. The pegs go in a tin that will not spill. Wind chimes are allowed their retirement to a drawer with the smile of a grandparent who has told enough good stories for 1 week. Branches have their talk with the handsaw and the pruner. This is not a campaign against shade, only a negotiation about leverage. The limb that has always leaned over the gutter with ideas about leadership is shown a little humility. Dead fronds from the coconut are lowered rather than letting the wind teach them to fly poorly. Banana clumps, generous as they are, learn that a little thinning keeps them from arguing with the fence. People cut with thought, trimming, not scalping. Teaching trees a better posture rather than asking them not to be themselves. The pile that results is bundled rather than ached over later, and each bundle is tied with the same quiet knots used at the dock. Pots become travellers. The noble terracotta that loves the gallery's edge is rolled to the leeward corner where wind discovers it cannot be bothered. Lighter plastic friends come inside, where the floor under the window becomes an accidental botanical exhibit. Tools that don't prefer rain, steel with its soft appetites for rust, are wiped and oiled, the cloth folded, the oil bottle capped with a care that reads as affection. Outdoor furniture learns humility, chairs stacked, tables turned on their sides, umbrellas finally convinced that a hinge is not a personality. A grill's tank is shut with the hand and with soapy water, because sniffing is imprecise and bubbles tell the truth without drama. Generators, if a house is one, get their lesson retaught. Never indoors, never in a breezeway, never where breath is borrowed from the machine. The test run is modest. The extension cords are checked as if they were veins. Fuel is stored with arithmetic and with a respect for distance from sparks. Stabilizer is not a fancy purchase, just a note to the future that the island intends to make things easy later. Cars are parked in the grammar of caution, not beneath the generous tree that loves to shed. Not beside the wall that once forgot its mortar in a downpour. Brakes are set, windows sealed and seated. Wipers left loose not to glue themselves to glass and sun. One vehicle may serve as a pantry with wheels for a day, water, a torch, a spanner, a pair of old shoes that are not heartbreakers if they get muddy. The other may keep its tank honest above half, because the island knows that the petrol station's conversation with electricity can become sulky for a day or two after wind. Animals learn the choreography. Chickens, those practical spirits, are brought early into a coop that has learned a thing or two about raccoons and gusts. Their water sits heavy, their feed sits safe, their roof is tied with a smile and a knot. Dogs and cats are accounted for, not as afterthoughts but as roommates. Their carriers find their handles, their tags tell the truth, their food bags share a shelf with rice as if they had always eaten at the same table. Mosquito nets are shaken from their quiet corners to be sure that if the night asks everyone to sleep in the same room, sleep can feel like a ceremony rather than a committee meeting. Before any roof meets any wind, the island practices a different kind of carpentry. It fits people together. There is no announcement, no brass band, no command post glowing on a hill. The net appears the way dew appears, everywhere at once when the light is right. Neighbors who wave from habit begin to wave with information in the gesture. A hand lifted over a hedge now means we are all set on batteries, or I have spare screws if you need them, or I checked on Miss Inez. She's fine and says to bring back her pie tin after the season. This is not heroism. It is maintenance, of friendships, of promises, of the everyday bridges that let a place cross its own river when the water rises. Lists, which at home are laminated and clipped, become human now. A street knows who on it keeps a tool that behaves when asked. Who owns a ladder that doesn't argue? Who can climb that ladder like a sentence that never stumbles? Who shouldn't be on a ladder and won't be allowed near one? It knows who rides a bicycle with a courier's memory for alleys and could carry a message when phones forget themselves. Who keeps a first aid kit that isn't mysterious and would rather teach you to use it than do the work alone. Children do not get assignments that pretend they are adults, but they are included, asked to run the who needs anything loop between three houses, asked to keep the pets calm, asked to put the torch back in the same drawer it came from so the drawer can be trusted at midnight. They are not props in a lesson. They are apprentices in a craft the island expects them to inherit. Some of the net is informal, a nod across a shop queue, a promise made with a chin point toward a shutter that still sags. Some of it is old, sturdy rope. Churches keep keys to shelters the way they keep hymn books. School caretakers know which rooms' windows don't sulk and which generator has the friendliest pull. Community centers that in ordinary months host domino nights now stock their quiet cupboards with things that taste like comfort after weather. A bag of sugar. Tins that will become stew. Cleaning supplies that smell like order. A few people keep radios and call signs in their pockets the way others keep prayers. If the grid wanders, a relay of voices will cross valleys and bays without raising its volume. Each person remembering to leave a breath in the line so the next can speak. Elders are the first line item on this living list. Not because they are fragile. Many survive storms that name themselves more loudly than the ones in the forecast, but because courtesy begins with the people who taught courtesy. The net assigns them redundantly. Not one neighbor, but two. Not one number, but a pair written large. Not one plan, but two doors, one truck, and a seat with a view. Medications are counted with the same unhurried arithmetic that fills water drums. A small note, font big enough to be seen without squinting in candlelight, sits by the pills with a clear schedule in case someone else must step in at midnight. Glasses are put where hands expect them. A favorite cup is placed beside the kettle on the low shelf, so the day can improvise without losing its manners. People with wheels are the net's long threads. Before the first advisory speaks in a sterner tone, 2 or 3 drivers who don't mind puddles agree to be messengers, taxi, delivery, courier. Their vehicles earn the same readiness as boats. Full tanks, steady tires, a trunk that contains a dignified jumble, water, a proper jack, a battery lamp that can light a hallway while someone ties a knot. Those drivers receive lists not of errands but of people. Mr. Jules if the clinic calls. Miss Paulette if the shelter opens. The family at the end of the lane whose toddler thinks suitcases are playgrounds. None of this is exotic. It is the choreography of errands the island already runs, written with a slightly thicker pencil. The net does a quiet census of vulnerabilities, and it does so without turning people into problems. Who uses a chair on wheels? Who is deaf and prefers a text to a knock? Who has a dog that thinks thunder is a debate and will need extra patience if the family must sleep away from home? Who keeps bees and will need to quiet them with smoke and courtesy before the wind tries to argue with the hives? What must be unplugged where? Which gate sticks when it rains? These are not gossip items. They are the notes a carpenter leaves for the next person who might have to pick up the plane on the morning that follows the first tightening of shutters. The island takes attendance without fuss. You good. Travels up and down the street like a soft tide. Replies arrive like small shells. Good here. Need 2 sandbags if anyone has. Checking on auntie now. Back in 20. Texts stay short because networks appreciate brevity when they are tired. For people who prefer voice, a call that rings twice and cuts means fine, and 3 short rings means please look this way. Codes like that belong to friendships, and the island is rich in them. On the porch of the house with the big breadfruit, someone keeps a paper notebook containing nothing more dramatic than columns. Who checked whom? Who will look in after lunch? Who has spare ice if the day grows humid and the grid yawns? When the season ends, this notebook will go back to being a ledger for mangoes and basils and the number of chairs lent to a birthday party if the shelter opens. The net expands to include furniture. People arrive with the kind of bedding that acknowledges sleep as a communal act, mats that don't complain, sheets that wash without sulking, pillows labeled with names so the night doesn't begin with introductions. The shelter inherits the island's etiquettes. There is a quiet place for children to be children, with crayons, a deck of cards, the well-worn book about a ship that got into an argument with a whale and learned better manners. There is a space for elders to sit as if they were still on their porches, with their chairs angled at the same degree they prefer at home. If someone must manage a generator, everyone already knows the 3 nevers. Never inside, never near a window, never where breath is borrowed from the machine, and so the manager's voice can remain a whisper. Extension cords behave like polite snakes. They go where they are invited and do not coil under blankets or trip ankles. A kettle runs, because tea solves more minor committee disagreements than any speech could. The net also remembers the people who keep the place stitched together when weather is not in the air. The woman who feeds stray cats behind the shop. The man who mends shoes that should have been thrown away but were persuaded to try again. The teenager who is better at fixing phones than any official service. Their skills are not rebranded as resources in this season. They are simply still what they are, pointed in the right direction. A cat feeder knows where nervous animals hide. A cobbler can turn an elastic band and a bit of webbing into a strap that prevents a bin from learning to fly. A phone fixer can make a power bank tell the truth about its remaining charge with a look and a cable. No one is asked to be more glamorous than usual. The island is merely asking everyone to do their familiar miracle and to do it near the center of the net rather than at its edge, quietly. Food becomes communal without becoming theatrical. A pot that would feed 5 is encouraged to think about 7, and it manages without complaint. The spice that lifts a simple meal is shared with a kind of generosity that doesn't ask for its jar back right away. If the grid naps, coolers become cousins and exchange blocks of ice like polite gifts. If the grid wakes and remembers the freezer, fish that might have lost its chance becomes a stew that feeds a corridor. Meals are not a distribution model. They are a conversation. Have some. Are you sure? Yes, and take a bowl to the lady by the steps. Paper plates will appear from a cupboard that never seems to go empty, because someone thinks ahead in the plainest, most useful way imaginable. Information moves through this fabric on a schedule that respects sleep. Out of respect for nerves, the net agrees not to pass along rumors with sharp elbows. If the wind shifts, the words "we will wait for the 9 p.m. bulletin" become a lullaby that brings the pulse down. If someone's roof creaks in rehearsal, the person with the ladder and the person who insists on holding the ladder are there before the creak has time to become an anecdote. If a street floods to the depth of an ankle, and then a calf, someone chalks a mark on a post so the story tomorrow will have numbers instead of adjectives. The chalk remains for a season, a quiet archival mark that teaches the future to pick the right place for sandbags without making a speech. The island's net is not a grid that can fail in a single point. It is a weave, and weaves enjoy redundancy. 2 people know the code to the community room. 2 others know how to make the old pump remember its duty. The person who keeps the keys does not keep the only keys. The person with the best torch is not the only light. Nobody hoards authority. It is distributed like seeds in a garden that does not trust monoculture. This distribution is not ideology. It is weather sense. If a limb falls across one path, another path should already be in the habit of being walked. If the island has a conversation with wind, it has an older, slower one with water. Roofs are the grammar of that conversation, gutters its punctuation, and downspouts the sentences that carry meaning away from thresholds. In the weeks before the season sharpens, the island lifts its eyes to eaves and ridgelines, to zinc and tile, to rafters that have memorized decades of wet seasons. Readiness here is not a ritual of fear. It's a rehearsal of flow. The aim is not to challenge the sky, but to help everything it sends find a courteous path home. Morning begins with a ladder leaned at the angle that feels like common sense. No one hurries up. A ladder rewards the tempo of breathing. The first hand that goes to the gutter is not armed with a tool. It goes bare to listen. The aluminum is cool and a little chalky. The brackets give back a small truth about their age. The screws tell, by the faintest wobble, whether they deserve to be tightened today or written in pencil for a drier month. A brush appears, the kind with bristles that don't sulk, and a scoop that understands leaf matter as a fact, not a fight. Breadfruit leaves, broad and theatrical, come first, their drama fading into neat piles on the ground. Casuarina needles, stubborn as rain on a market day, gather next, sifted away in patient handfuls. Somewhere down the run, a small plaster of seeds and dust has convinced itself it is concrete. A flat stick persuades it to remember it is only a story about concrete, then the brush makes the story end. Gutter guards are discussed on fences the way recipes are, some swear by them, others by vigilance. Where they exist, the mesh is lifted and rinsed, not judged. Where they do not, the channels themselves are reconsidered like an old paragraph, each sag or rise making sense in the moment it was built, less now. The bracket that always seemed a little shy becomes the object of a small kindness, a second bracket for company, or a tighter bite from a longer screw. Sealant, clear, and showy, honest, appears for the joints that pride themselves on letting a tablespoon of water out at the worst corner. The tube is stored tip down between uses, a trick learned from a neighbor who doesn't waste tubes or patience to tee the mouth of the downspout. The rainhead pays its own kind of rent. Its screen catches not just leaves but stories, lizard eggs that didn't learn the map, a plastic bead from a festival long over, a curl of zinc shaving from a repair at the ridge months ago. The screen is brushed, the head rinsed, the coupling tested with a good-natured twist. Some houses have a first flush diverter, the humble genius that wastes a little to save a lot. It is emptied and reset, its cap given the faintest smear of silicone grease so that on the first day the sky returns to generosity. The cap will listen when asked to open and shut in the right order. All of this sounds fussy, and yet it is not. It is the kind of attention people routinely give a favorite pot or a radio dial, a practical fondness that extends a tool's life and improves a day beyond the gutter's edge. The roof itself receives the hand's slow grammar. Zinc, with its quiet drumbeat in rain, is walked with humility and soft shoes. Each fastener is an alphabet of small decisions. Is the washer cracked or only sun-browned? Does the screw bite or spin? Is the hole now a shape that deserves a larger friend and a dab of sealant under the washer before the new bite? Ridge caps are considered the way a shopkeeper considers a till, not because anyone expects dishonesty from the weather, but because experience has taught that good closure prevents awkward conversations. Where two sheets overlap, the laps are read like lines of verse. You want them to lie the way a poem does when you finally get the rhythm right. If the edge curls even a little, the hammer speaks with a tone that is firm but not scolding, and a stitch screw goes in where future wind once dreamed of entering. Clay tile roofs argue in a different dialect. Tiles are strong in one direction, brittle in another. A foot placed a little wrong teaches an expensive lesson. So a crawling board travels with the worker, spreading weight like a sleep that refuses to dig its elbows into one spot. Broken tiles, catalogued by the eye and confirmed by the fingertips pilgrim walk, are removed with the ritual that avoids sharp edges. Then a twin, kept for just this purpose in a corner of the shed, takes its place with a small there now. Mortar that thinks it is still, in its youth receives a brush and a repair where it clearly won't be asked to hold a hurricane alone. The ridge, usually the place of pride, learns to be humble. A lick of sealant where the old work admits it could use a hand. A clip where wind once snuck its fingers under and then told the world about the trick. In wood-roofed houses, board, shingle, or the glorious patchwork solutions that live where budgets and ingenuity meet, the conversation is more intimate. The attic breathes a little cooler when louvers remember to open. The rafters show their grain in the slanting light like a ledger of years. Old nail holes are read as the diary of storms past. Here, the work is half physics, half tenderness. Where a brace added last season did its job too well, a matching brace elsewhere asks to join, so that forces greet one another with kindness instead of arguing across the ridge. Where an old leak left a sighing stain on a board that never got its apology, a fresh flashing tucks under shingle and over sense, sending future water down the correct paragraph without needing to raise its voice. Water at the eave is one thing. Water at the door is another. The ground speaks its own language in a storm, and the island learns to read it with chalk and patience. A path is drawn with a rake, not a trench but a nudge, away from thresholds, toward the patch of yard that has volunteered, over the years, to be a temporary creek. Sandbags are not fortresses here. They are punctuation. One at the low corner the mason once insisted was level, and which, technically, is. Two as a hyphen across the place the step meets the stoop, to slow the water's opinion without starting an argument that flings it under the door. A third, if memory suggests it, at the foot of the gate that likes to gather a shallow lake during the spirited hours of a squall. The bags are tied well and stacked like loaves, their bellies tamped to sit kindly against one another so that no sudden edge invites mischief. Downspout endings are reconsidered as politely as dinner seating. Splash blocks are re-angled. Extensions that usually serve as a formality are stretched into their full utility, persuaded to carry the sentence of water farther into the paragraph of lawn where it can be read calmly. Where the house feeds a cistern, the code of hygiene remains law. First flush respected, screens unpretentious and clean, lids tight enough to keep out the small and curious. Where the house feeds the street, the house keeps a conscience. It will not send its enthusiasm into a neighbour's yard, not even if gravity suggests it with a sly grin. A length of corrugated pipe, bought when it was cheap and kept coiled like a polite snake, is invited to serve the week. After, it will return to its coil and wait for the next season's conversation. Gutters that once believed they were merely decorative learn their true vocation. On galleries, the Caribbean's outdoor living rooms, half-round runs that used to lend a charming line to the edge now become the first sentence in keeping the living room livable. Their outlets, once standoffish, are introduced to honest downspouts. Their joints are introduced to a sealant that has made lasting friendships all over the island. The gallery's slope, so easy to ignore when sandals dry overnight, is checked with a marble or a kind eye. Does the water prefer to leave the house at the house's invitation? Or does it need a little reminder in the form of a plain shim no one will see because it hides beneath a board that, like good work, doesn't need to be seen to be proud? And then there is the sound. A roof speaks fluently in rain. The first squalls of the season are not merely tests of hardware. They are auditions of music. Zinc offers a drumming that, if the screws are honest and the laps true, becomes a single instrument with 1,000 hands that never trip over one another. Tile clicks softly, a marimba in the distance. Boarded roofs whisper like a crowd learning the words to a hymn. In that sound, people hear verdicts. A new downspout that sings quietly means water is finding the path it was promised. A hiss near the eave means errant drip now corrected. A sudden tattoo where there used to be none means the gutter remembered a leaf even after all that care. Or perhaps a gecko has a different opinion about where to spend the evening. The housekeeper's ear, the carpenter's ear, the auntie's ear, each translates and writes a note in the mind for tomorrow's small rounds inside. Where ceilings are the map of everything a roof decides, the eye takes one last tour. The place the north wind likes to test is inspected not with suspicion, but with respect. A torched beam travels the rafters, finds old stains and admires their age, finds new with it glows like a promise, finds cobweb architecture that survives all seasons and all fashions. A bucket, prepositioned where it has caught honour and rain before, stands empty, almost sulky. With luck, it will stay that way. The towel beside it is clean. The difference between annoyance and a mess is often only the speed with which a dry cloth arrives. A shelter is not a bunker. It is a room that has learned how to be kind. In Caribbean houses, the safest room is rarely the one with the best view. It is the one with the least to say to wind and glass. Before weather earns its capital letter, families begin the slow migration inward, the way birds ease shoreward when the horizon grows thoughtful. The goal is not to ride it out like a dare. It is to shorten the conversation between the house and the storm, to make the dialogue small, steady, and polite, with as few sharp words as possible. The interior room is chosen with a librarian sensibility, central, low, with shelves that hold things safely and walls that have opinions about staying put. It is often a bedroom that forgets its windows under a pair of sturdy wardrobes, or a hallway that can become a dormitory with 3 mattresses and a sense of humour. Concrete walls are admired, but good wood with honest fasteners is no less worthy. Doors that latch without theatrics are preferred. If louvers must join the night, they are backed from inside with patience. Thin plywood cut last season to the measurements penciled on the back. Cushions that volunteer without complaint. A quilt that will forgive a nail hole and later be mended with a story. The room learns a new layout. Mattresses leave their usual addresses and come to live on the floor, stacked in ways that turn corners into dens where children can imagine tents instead of pressure gradients. A low table becomes a command center without uniforms, radio, torch, spare batteries dated with unromantic accuracy. A first aid kit whose contents are familiar because someone opened it last week just to reacquaint their hands with where the bandages live. A notebook sits open, not to chronicle heroics, but to remember gentle details. What time the last bulletin arrived. Which neighbour texted that they were settled. How many hours since the dog went out. Whether the kettle was boiled and the thermos filled, light is edited. The bright overhead that scalds dust is put to bed. Lamps that speak in room tones take over. If the grid insists on a nap, the battery lantern rises to the occasion with a glow that forgives faces their edges and makes the room into a campfire circle without flame. Candles are admired but kept as relics. The island knows the difference between a romance and a risk, and open flame is a flirtation that storms punish. The air is taught to behave kindly, too. Doors stand where they can breathe. Curtains are tied, not left to find their own theatre. A small fan, if the power stays diplomatic, is aimed to turn the room's air, not to fight the house's new, tighter geometry noise receives a curator. The radio is a guest who is welcome at appointed times. The 9 p.m. bulletin that lands like a calm elder's voice, the morning update that offers a tone for the day. Between bulletins, the room does not court chatter. It prefers the soft bureaucracy of pages turning, a deck of cards practicing small civic rituals on a blanket, the click of a domino table if one has been invited in and promised not to grow competitive. Children are reassured that boredom is not an emergency. It is a kind of weather the mind travels through on its way to sleep. Adults, too. There is permission to nap, to do nothing, to be the quiet weight that keeps a room from feeling empty when the wind asks rude questions of the walls. Food is arranged to be both easy and consoling. A tray lives in the shelter like a small servant. Cups. A tin of crackers that are always better than memory. Something sweet parceled in polite portions. Fruit that can be unpeeled without knives if night asks for a snack. The thermos holds tea as if it was storing patient good news, and a second one may hold something as unfashionable and perfect as hot milk. Meals do not attempt feats. They succeed at being warm, at being shared in a circle that remembers. To pass the salt and to ask whether anyone wants the last spoon. Rituals. That remind the room of its humanness just when. Weather makes everything want to. Impersonate a diagram, breath is given the courtesy of planning. If anyone in the house carries an inhaler, it graduates from a pocket to the top of the command table, where it can be found at night by a hand that does not wish to wake eyes. If there is a CPAP or another machine that helps sleep, its owner sleeps nearest the outlet that lives a few inches above the floor. Most honest outlets do. Power banks, if the house keeps them, charge quietly when the grid is generous, and they are praised for their humility when they step in later without complaint. Windows in other rooms are left cracked toward the lee if the house can manage it, to let stale air find excuses to leave. The shelter room, central and calm, is spared drafts, not starved of air. Pets are roommates, not afterthoughts. The carrier that lives behind a curtain most of the year reintroduces itself to the cat and earns forgiveness with a towel that smells like familiar chairs. Dogs, whose job description includes empathy, are given their own bed within arm's reach and water that cannot be tipped by an enthusiastic tail. A litter tray hides near the door with dignity. Leashes and collars live on a hook where the hand expects to find them, so no farce erupts when the rain pauses and a quick, brave dash outdoors becomes the plan. If a parrot shares the house, its cage is covered when the room needs to sleep. A bird that knows songs can teach a knight how to exhale. Storms are tests of plumbing as much as anything, and the shelter room teaches modesty here too. Buckets receive their assignments as if staffing a hotel. One for flushing, one for washing, a smaller one for the gentle jurisdiction of hand washing. Soap sits where the hand lands, even in the dark. Towels are not hoarded, but spared from becoming floor soldiers. The old sheet earns that role with the nobility of the retired, pressed into service only if a leak insists on inventing itself above a clean corner. A mop head is checked now, not when it becomes a philosopher about the meaning of absorbency. Electricity is treated like a shy friend. The refrigerator is visited as if it were a patient. Short appointments, long intervals, kindness in tone. Extension cords are run thoughtfully, with their green and orange spines kept away from the feet that will cross the room at midnight. No cord is asked to impersonate a power strip's courage. No strip is asked to impersonate a wall's good wiring. Generators, if they join the family, are never invited into the house or its breezeways. Carbon monoxide does not negotiate, and the island has learned this lesson in other people's tragedies. If the generator hums outside on the lee side in the rain's intermissions, its exhaust is shepherded away by nothing more dramatic than insisting on the right direction. Fuel sits far from the room, far from the machine, far from imaginations. Its can is labelled with the kind of legible honesty the island admires. The shelter room also holds space for imagination to settle down. Children's questions arrive like birds. Where does the wind go when it is finished? Can the sea get tired? Which is stronger, our roof or a dragon? Answers are measured, gentle, and sometimes delightfully literal. The wind goes to tell another island its story. The sea naps between telling it. Our roof is stronger than a dragon because we feed it screws and patience. Stories are currency, and this is a good market. Elders trade the soft coins of memory. How the night in '79 smelled like saltfish because someone knocked over the barrel in the kitchen. How the rooster decided to crow every time the gusts hit the eaves. How the neighbor's goat stared at the sky as if reading it for typos. Laughter is not a betrayal of seriousness. It is the oil on the hinges of a long night. There is, too, the ritual of the check-around. Every so often, without a drum roll, one adult rises and moves through the house like punctuation. Comma at the back door, shut. Sandbag kind. Semicolon at the leeward window, dry. Slats patient. Period at the main switch, off, as promised. Dash to the kitchen, thermos still warm. Then a paragraph break back at the shelter room where the radio waits for its next appointed recital. This tour is not about catching failure. It is about continuing a friendship with the house while the house does the difficult part of its job. Sleep is invited early and sincerely. The room does not scold anyone who cannot find it right away. It leans into rhythms that help. A clock that ticks softly is welcome. A phone that insists on tintinnabulation is taught manners with do not disturb. Breathing exercises, those unglamorous. Trusty boats that carry minds across choppy water are offered like tea, in through the nose as if smelling something good on a Sunday, out through the mouth as if cooling a spoon. The island has always known how to sleep with one ear open. It does not find the posture heroic. It finds it ordinary. Like the way hammocks teach backs to be kind, when the hardest hours pass, and they do, they always do. No matter how slowly they take their bows, the room will look much the same as it did the evening before, mattresses like islands. A circle of cups with their rings on the low table, a notebook with no poetry and all wisdom. Someone will open the door a little and listen not for silence, but for the softer kind of sound that means the house has been conversing, not arguing, with wind. After that, a kettle will remember its duty. A thank you will be given to the lantern. A text will wander out to a neighbor with just 2 words, all good. The storm may have more to say later. But for now, the shelter calm has done its work. The choreography of quiet kept the center gentle. And the center held. Water is a negotiator that never raises its voice. It arrives with manners, first as odor in the air, then as a glimmer on the step, then as a patient insistence that low things belong to it. On Caribbean islands, the wisdom of living below cloud lines is written in chalk and memory along skirting boards, in the way furniture learns to lift itself, and in the habit of making rooms that know how to say please, this way to passing water. Preparedness here is not a barricade. It is choreography, 1,000 small elevations that together teach a house to keep its dignity when the street wants to rehearse being a canal. The first education is cartography. Every home owns a private flood map, drawn over seasons and revised with the kind of pencil that forgives erasures. You learn the low speech of your thresholds, which still confuses heavy rain for an invitation. Which corner of the courtyard believes itself a basin? Which step remembers the storm of 3 summers ago with a faint watermark the color of tea? Chalk marks go where stories go stale. On the porch pillar at ankle, calf, knee. On the inside of a storage closet where bins live. On the wall of the utility room beside the tap that sulks. They are not warnings so much as measurements that let today be kinder than yesterday. If water once kissed this tile, the items that cannot swim do not nap there anymore. Height begins to work long before the first band of rain. Cords are shortened. Plugs graduate from floor-level outlets to the waist-high ones that were once called fussy and now reveal their foresight. Where outlets are stubbornly low, extension cords, the stout, honest ones, lift the connection to a hook on a bookshelf or a nail under a louver, so that the meeting between electricity and puddle remains theoretical. Power strips are relocated from the floor to the side of a desk with 2 tidy screws. The screws will stay there after the season because useful things like to stay useful. Wi-Fi routers climb onto a middle shelf. Modems stop sulking in skirting board dust and learn the view from a mantle's edge. The television, if it cannot live high, learns to rest on risers made from offcuts. For blocks of wood that have prevented more grief than any speech about surge protection, furniture, too, acquires a polite ambition. The sofa stands on its toes, felt pads stacked over discreet wooden pucks, enough to demote a shallow inch of water from disaster to nuisance. Bookshelves put their pride on the second shelf. The bottom shelf, suddenly zen, holds plastic bins that forgive damp or that carry their contents upstairs if asked. Children's toys discover tubs with lids that snap like good tempers. Puzzles, paper, and crayons travel to a higher city where boredom still has a playground. Rugs, those soft flirts with mildew, are rolled and leaned like tall scrolls. The floor breathes better without them, and the act of rolling is a domestic bow to gravity's intentions. Kitchens enjoy a different geometry in this weather. The bottom cupboards become a republic of things that will not cry if they get damp. Steel pots that forgive a rinse. Mixing bowls that prefer the hose to the hairdryer. stacks of plates that do not mind a moment in the sun. The sentimental and the irreplaceable go up and away. The practical comes down to stand guard. Cleaning supplies remain, but they learn to live in lidded crates. Bleach is too important to go wandering on a wet floor, and vinegar too eager to escape its bottle. A mop and bucket are not exiled to a shed. They are promoted to the kitchen corner with a folded towel and a spare squeegee, tools that will prevent small rivers from inventing tributaries under the fridge. If a sump pump is part of the house's ensemble, its cord finds a high outlet and its hose a prearranged path. Nothing in storm time should be meeting water for the first time. Bathrooms, those finite theatres where water is usually the star, are asked to practice ensemble work. A spare bucket, labelled in pencil flush, stands where a sleepy hand can find it in the dark. Another, wash, keeps company with soap and a clean cloth for floors that adopt temporary lakes. Towels that have retired from hospitality become engineers. They draft a small levee along the threshold if the breeze insists on dragging spray under the door. Silicone strips, plain, unromantic, are pressed along gaps where the louver meets the frame, a courtesy to drafts and to prying drips. None of this is glamorous. All of it is a love letter to dry feet. Doors and their cousins, thresholds, are the diplomats. A roll towel is amateur theatre. A sandbag is punctuation. 2. Set like commas just outside where water fantasize about entering. Slow the sentence enough for you to edit. In houses with the luxury of a step-down gallery, the gallery learns to be a sacrificial shallow pan for night. Items migrate inward. The step receives a temporary strip of rubber or a wedge of planed wood to sharpen its slope. And the drain that always needed to be persuaded receives a persuasive cleaning with a gloved hand and a bucket of persistence. Outside, a length of corrugated pipe connects downspouts to the patch of garden that always wanted to be a temporary brook. It does its job, then coils again to be a tidy snake until next time. Storage acquires waterproof grammar. Cardboard is poetry in the dry season and a pulpy confession in the wet. Plastic bins are prose that survives editing. Labels face outward and upward, large, legible, undramatic, so that the bin that matters can be recognized at a glance and lifted without audition. Heavy things that should not float live on the bottom. Light valuables that must not drown live at the top. In sheds, the floor is not a place. Wood rests on skids, bags on pallets, tools on hooks. A wall that never did much suddenly learns to host a whole conversation of pegs and brackets, and the floor, freed, becomes a temporary streambed if it needs to without turning ownership of objects into an argument. Vehicles respect height in their own way, by finding high ground and staying there. The car moves before the first proper rain rehearsals. Tires do not debate depth in a dip they cannot read, and engines do not sip from puddles that think they are lakes. Parking lots with uphill exits are worth a small walk in weather. Curbs become allies. Inside the vehicle, papers rise from glove boxes to zip sleeves in the go bag. Chargers, torches, a towel, and an old pair of shoes form a miniature ark waiting politely in the trunk. Keys that have been known to nap on low tables learn a hook on the wall, high and faithful, next to the house's laminated contacts. Animals perform this dance without study. Cats select higher furniture with the confidence of architects. Dogs look for their bed in the dry island the family made for them and, finding it at the mattress line beside the safe room, circle and sigh. Chickens are closed early in a coop that knows about splashback. Their feed rises in sealed tubs. Their water sits in a dish that will not join a tide. Aquariums, little weather of their own, are given a wide berth from windows and a patient towel skirting, just in case. If a generator hums, its cord arcs above any path water would prefer. If it sleeps, the lanterns nod from high shelves, content to be islands of light if the floor hosts a small sea. There is a habit here of acceptance that is not surrender. People do not curse every drop that arrives uninvited. They root it. It's an editor's attitude, that the sentence of water will be more readable if redirected with commas and the occasional semicolon of a sandbag. The broom becomes a scribe, pushing water toward the exit the house has nominated. The squeegee is a quiet usher. If a threshold loses an argument, the apology is prepared, a bucket already waiting, a towel that will not be missed, a tray beneath the wardrobe's feet to keep its ankles dry until the wind grows bored and moves its show elsewhere stairs. When present, become the border between two countries with an easy visa. The lower floor becomes public, things that can be washed, disinfected, forgiven. The upper becomes treasury, books, photos, the instruments that make the house's voice. Movement between levels is practiced at a pace that leaves breath for a laugh. If there is no second story, there is still an upstairs, the top shelves, the wardrobe shoulders, the high hooks on the backs of doors. Hooks are under-celebrated. This is their season. They hold guitars, handbags, tool belts, the shopping bag that happens to hold the family's daily medicines. Gravity is invited to be an ally. If you must grab one thing at midnight, let it be hanging, ready to go. Documentation is part of height, too. Phones, charged and practical, become cameras with patience. Not for spectacle or complaint, but for memory with numbers. The chalk line's height beside a ruler. The path water preferred through the utility room. The corner where the doors draft learned a new trick. These images will teach the house how to be smarter next month and will help a conversation with a claims adjuster be about facts rather than adjectives. When the grid reappears, they will be quietly filed in a folder named for this season, because memory is a map, and better maps make gentler futures. Storms that travel with pride often bring a paradox in their pockets, a quiet that feels like a favor and behaves like a riddle. On Caribbean islands, people know the difference between a pause and an ending. They know that a banded storm writes in clauses, with commas of light and windless phrases, and sometimes, with a flourish known all over these waters, the long, uncanny sentence of an eye. Readiness includes the manners of using those pauses without letting them use you. The first rule of a lull is restraint. When wind loosens its grammar and rain stops speaking in paragraphs, the body wants to burst outdoors and stretch. The mind, too, wants to correct every small disorder at once. The palm frond that leans like a half-told tale. The gutter screen that surely needs its vanity brushed. The misplaced bucket, the flag that forgot to furl. Yet the island has learned the tone of a false truce. It opens the door a measure and listens beyond the porch. Is the sea still loud behind its breath? Do the casuarina tops tell of a higher wind that hasn't yet remembered the ground? Are the clouds moving in one disciplined direction or in small, impatient troops? If the answers are ambiguous, the house keeps its shoes on the mat and sends only its eyes that if the pause grows honest, wind laying down its tools. Sky brightening in a way that feels like daylight and not interrogation. The house chooses tasks with the composure of a nurse in a busy ward. There are errands for a short window and errands for a long one. The lull rarely promises the latter. Buckets become ambassadors first. They are emptied, wrung dry, set back in their posts like chairs turned toward the door for the next guest. Door sills are wiped because a dry sill is a smaller invitation to warders' bright ideas. Towels are swapped for their dry cousins so that the next skirmish with a draft does not begin with weary cloth. The thermos is refilled not as luxury but as logistics. Tea steadies moods the way braces steady doors that if the eye arrives, the big, theatrical hush, sky suddenly thoughtful in the middle, birds trying their luck, the island changes key without changing tempo. People step out with the wariness of sailors who know a wind shift when they smell it. The barometer's needle has been speaking for hours, and no needle lies in an eye. The air is wrong in a memorable way, heavy without menace, bright without applause. The world's edge is sharpened as if a glassblower cleared his throat. This is a time for the exterior census that doesn't require ladders or bravado. Lines on boats, still doubled, snubbers kind, chafe guards behaving. Fenders, not wandered away. Sandbags, not learning to skate. Punctuation still where the sentence bends. Downspout extensions, pointed like good fingers toward the garden brook, not backwards into the neighbor's philosophy. The yard's sail area remains reduced. No chair is tempted into becoming Icarus. Neighbors meet in the eye the way strangers nod in a quiet museum. There is a shared understanding that this is not a park. This is a polite lobby between two loud rooms. All good. Is asked without embroidery. All good. How's Auntie? Sleeping. Says tell you your pie plate is safe. Children, coaxed by wide blue sky, are given boundaries as if chalked on the air. No farther than the gate, no climbing, shoes on, ears open. Pets are offered a quick relief walk with the shortest leash in the drawer and the biggest voice of caution in the pocket. Thunder that learned patience for an hour will resume its hobby soon enough. Tasks in the eye prefer ground level and near hand. Leaves that conspire to dam a drain are bribed with a gloved hand and a low word. A loose bin lid is sat on properly and, if it shows ambition, is tied down. A branch that finally gave up pretending to be alive is pulled aside and bundled for later, not wrestled now into a masterpiece of yard order. If a shutter has worked itself into a sulk, its hasp is persuaded with the flat of a screwdriver, not with a ladder and intense speeches. Anything that asks the body to forget how quickly the world can change is crossed off the list with the dignity of after. Inside, the lull is an accountant. Batteries turn out under the lamp. You good? Good. A phone that sneaked more work than it should during the last hour naps again in airplane mode. The radio's timing is checked. When next, precisely, will the calm voice visit? If a list has grown smudgy at the edges, it is recapid, not for neatness, but because fresh handwriting changes the brain's conversation with its tasks. The safe room breathes. Mattresses settle after shifts. The kettle earns another round, and cups are washed and set back in their rank and file. Children's shoulders, which carry more weather than adults admit, are listened to. A minute of the tallest adult's back pressed against the best wall. A child's head curled in. That ritual says more about safety than many announcements. Eyes have a perversity in them. The back half of some storms arrives from a direction the house is less practiced at courting. Louvers that spent all morning being polite to the east are suddenly asked to answer the west. The door that behaves like a gentleman on a southerly learns the north's rough elbows. The lull gives time to rethink this geometry. A towel at the wrong threshold becomes a towel at the right one. The bucket with a history under the north corner takes a quiet stroll to the south's idea of humour. The small wedge that keeps a leeward door from inventing its own draft migrates like a bird to a new roost. None of it is dramatic. All of it is choreography tightening its steps before the music resumes. There is also the art of not borrowing trouble from a lull. Social feeds, which live to manufacture drama from still water, are gently silenced. The island has community channels that know how to keep their syntax clean. Radio, the official bulletin, the neighbor who actually looks out the window before speaking. Rumor thrives in the eye because it can see itself reflected in the sudden light. The house chooses not to be a mirror. It is enough to know the time of the next advisory and the way the palm leaves tilt. Anything more is seasoning, and even good kitchens do not pour the whole jar when the edge of the far eye wall shows itself, a line on the horizon becoming a grey fence. The temperature changing in a way skin understands before instruments do. The house moves with the unhurried exactness of a practiced stage crew. Doors that were cracked for air are pulled to their old inches. Latches return to their remembered angles. The lamp dims from conversation to flicker. Children are reminded, with the cheerful specificity of a nursery rhyme, where the torch lives, where the water waits, where the book will be opened when the long drum starts again. Pets make their last quick rounds and receive the quiet thank you of a treat for returning promptly. The radio is moved closer to the hand that will hold it. The pencil that tags times on the notebook sits beside it, newly sharpened. The breath lowers itself, the way a singer finds the anchor note before a chorus, and then the second act begins. Often louder, often from the other shoulder. Often full of arguments the house anticipated and a few it didn't. It is rarely a surprise, though it may be different. The gutters, cleaned hours earlier, take their duty with a fresh throat. The downspouts write cursive where they wrote print before. The sandbags answer from new corners with the same commas and semicolons they offered in the morning. What the lull purchased, more than any single task, is composure. Panics that would have sprawled across the room now stay in their chairs. The mind, which might have wanted to race in a single direction, now moves along its tidy 2- and 3-step routines. A lull did not save the house. It made saving the house feel like what it has always been on this island, Work done in company with time, not against it. After, when the storm has made its apology by leaving, the memory of the lull remains crisp. People talk about the smell, how the eye brought out the buried perfume of crushed leaves and wet zinc warmed for a moment. How birds argued about whether to sing and then sang as if trying a folk song they had almost forgotten. Children remember that the world can be both strange and safe in same hour. Elders remember other eyes, other lulls, other afternoons when the sky took a breath in the middle of its own sentence. The household, tallying its small victories, writes a line in the notebook, I at 142. West Side after. It is the smallest kind of history, behavioral, domestic, unheroic, and it is how a place becomes wise. Before the sky decides to write in long, windy sentences, the island rewrites a smaller text, the body's handbook. Storm readiness is not only shudders and lines. It is also the quiet medicine of clean hands, steady breaths, and tools that turn a scrape into a footnote rather than a chapter. Caribbean kitchens and bedside tables take on a soft, practical glow as first aid kits step forward. Prescriptions line up with modest pride. And old wisdom hums like a ceiling fan at low speed. The first aid kit is not a prop. It is a friendly drawer with a zipper. It lives where hands live, reachable without hunting, bright enough inside that a night search does not turn patience into a scavenger hunt. Its inventory favors humility over glamour, bandage rolls that do not pretend to be capes, sterile gauze pads and sizes that match the island's ordinary mishaps, adhesive strips that stick politely without taking half the skin with them when they leave, tape that tears straight, scissors that do not sulk, tweezers whose tip aligns like a pair of old friends, a small bottle of antiseptic that smells like tidy decisions, a sachet or two of oral rehydration salts, because weather is thirsty work and heat writes its own kind of trouble, a digital thermometer that tells the truth without asking eyes to squint, spare batteries taped to its case like a promise. Medicine learns the choreography of days. Prescriptions are counted with the same unhurried arithmetic used for water. How many pills until Tuesday? How many if the clinic naps? How many if a friend forgets theirs and you have always been the one with a spare? Labels are legible. Names face forward. A simple chart, morning, afternoon, night, takes its place under magnet, large type, plain language, so that any adult in the room can become the responsible adult at 2 in the morning. Inhalers graduate from handbags to the command table. Insulin rides in the fridge's calmest corner in a small insulated pouch that knows where the ice packs sleep. For devices that hum, CPAPs, nebulizers, the plan is not a shrug. It is a sentence with nouns. This outlet, that power bank, the neighbor with the generator if the night asks for help. The clinic's number sits larger than others, and beside it, a brief note. Nurse Josephine knows Dad. Ask for her if nervous. Tetanus is not a character from myth here. It is a vaccine on the calendar. Storm seasons tidy the mind around small penetrations, metal edges that have opinions, old nails with historical interests. The adult who cannot remember their last booster writes a date on the hand with a pen and visits the clinic on the next dry afternoon. Those who handle chainsaws, machetes, or the occasionally persuasive sheet of zinc are especially fond of current tetanus stories. Gloves that fit hands, boots that respect ankles, and eyewear that stop splinters from writing their own literature join the first aid kit not inside it but in the place where work begins, by the door, on the porch, in the bed of the truck that thinks of itself as a toolbox with wheels. Hygiene becomes a soft discipline. Soap moves upward, onto a shelf that stays dry even when floors imagine themselves as small estuaries. Hand sanitizer stations appear like tiny lighthouses, by the safe room's door, near the kitchen's drinking water, beside the bucket that learned to be wash instead of flush. Towels retire from decoration and join the workforce, clean and folded. Their hook labels honest: hands, floor, dog. A box of disposable gloves earns its keep not by looking medical, but by keeping infections out of stories just when the island has enough stories to tell. Wound cleaning is done as if the future were listening, gently, completely, with boiled and cooled water if necessary and with the kind of patience that prevents a small thing from becoming a loud thing, Heat and breath are part of quiet medicine. The island knows the difference between being hot and being harmed by heat. It provides shade as if it was shade's job to be everywhere. Work is scheduled like a sensible sermon, morning and late afternoon. Noon is for lists, not ladders. A hat hangs by the door not as ornament but as policy. Water is sipped before thirst grows argumentative. Salt finds its way into food again, the lightest pinch, the kind that reminds muscles to stay civil. For those who need it, rehydration mixture is not reserved for drama. It is deployed the way tea is deployed for moods. Breathing devices, from inhalers to spacers, are demonstrated to children as if showing off magic tricks. When wind raises dust and mold releases opinions, everyone already knows how to find an even breath, small clinics, public, private, church rooms that turn practical on a storm season by becoming legible. Their hours are posted where people actually look. Shop doors, the radio bulletin, a laminated card shared on community boards that do not gossip. A note says which clinic keeps a small stash of antibiotics for wounds that insist on being written about. Another says where a midwife can be found if a baby chooses whether for an entrance queue. Blood pressure cuffs lend their squeeze to neighbours who wonder whether a headache is weather or something more. The island learns, again, the names of nurses who know the community's family tree by first names and the nicknames of ailments by laughter. Mosquitoes enjoy wet seasons the way children enjoy long holidays. The island answers with screens mended in the patient weeks before, coils and plug-ins balanced with ventilation, and the quiet heroism of tipping water out of containers without applause. Repellent joins the go bag and the bedside table. The kind that smells like lemongrass gets its own fan club. The unscented gets respect for not competing with tea. Nets come down from closets, shaken like flags before a parade, and hang with the utilitarian romance that belongs to long naps after long lists. If dengue, chikungunya, or Zika have been recent visitors, the radio teaches, without scolding, the signs that deserve a clinic's eye. The clinic listens without performing importance. Stress, which prefers the shadows, is given a chair in the light. The island does not pretend that nerves are only for newcomers. A storm season is work, and work asks for the kind of rest that does not need persuading. Sleep is invited early. Naps are redeemed from their reputation as laziness and return to their old place as maintenance. For minds that race, breathing earns its old degrees. In through the nose for the count of 4, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 6, numbers that soften rooms. A page in the notebook becomes a mood ledger. Not confessions, just receipts. Tea helped. Radio off after 9 helped. Talking to Missy Nez over the fence helped a lot. Children are taught that fear is an animal you can pet without letting it climb on your head. Elders are asked for stories not because stories replace storms, but because stories make a home sturdy from the inside. Sanitation teaches its plainest lessons. Buckets have jurisdictions and labels as if they were officials. Wash, flush, mop. Bleach, that modest alchemist, has its dilution written large where tired eyes can see it. So many drops per litre for water making. A splash per bucket for floors. A stronger mix for the place where raw things become meals. Surfaces that food loves are cleaned early and often. Sponges, which love drama, are replaced with cloths that survive soap and boiling like stoics. Garbage bags find lids and tight knots. Bins find a tie to a fence so wind cannot audition them as percussion instruments for the neighborhood. If the grid naps and the fridge sighs, choices are made in daylight. Not after dark. Cook it now, share it now. Or let it go now, none of which is a tragedy when neighbors' pots are already warm after weather. When shoes consider puddles like diplomats consider borders. Foot care becomes the small hero of big days. Boots, not sandals, when nails and glass are considering memoirs. Socks that are changed before skin grows tender. A clean, dry place for feet to audition for the evening. A dab of antiseptic on small cuts now rather than a clinic visit later. For those who take blood thinners or medicines that negotiate with kidneys or sugar, the notebook tracks doses and meals even when time has turned slippery. Routines keep medicine useful. The island tells on itself kindly, I forget when I am tired, which is the sort of honesty that keeps people well. Communication and consent belong to quiet medicine. 2. The family's plan about who decides what, if a clinic becomes part of the day, is not improvised while water taps the shutters. It is written now in a calm kitchen. Who holds the insurance paper? Who keys the car? Who stays with the dog? Who speaks first to the nurse? The plan says, if we disagree, we pause, breathe, and ask the nurse to referee. The plan also says, we tell our neighbor where we are going before we go. Plans like that make rooms gentle even when weather is not, and because medicine includes morale. There is chocolate, kept cool, portioned like grace. There is a radio program saved on a phone that doesn't need a signal. There is a hymn, a calypso, a cricket score, a joke about the rooster who insists on crowing only when gusts hit the eaves. Laughter has always been part of the island pharmacopoeia. It lowers shoulders, deepens breath, and reminds hands to move in accurate ways. Readiness wears two faces on the islands, the face of prevention and the face of mending what the wind will try to ruffle even when prevention has done its best work. Long before any squall lifts its hem, households collect a modest parliament of tools, not the roaring drama of heavy machines, but the honest, everyday kit that lets a person make a door remember its hinge, a roof remember its lap, a window remember its latch. The logic is simple and sleep-friendly. If the storm finds a loose sentence in the house, the tools will be ready to add the missing punctuation without fuss. The core kit is humble and precise. A hammer whose head does not wobble and whose handle sits clean in the hand. 2 screwdrivers, Phillips and flat, a driver with bits that don't play hide and seek, and enough spare screws in the 2 lengths the house actually uses. A tape measure whose blade returns without tantrum. A utility knife with a fresh blade and 3 spares taped to its cheek. A carpenter's pencil, fat and forgiving, alongside an ordinary one that writes in small places. A roll of exterior tape that doesn't mind humidity. A coil of braided line. A headlamp that makes both hands free and accepts the shape of the forehead like an old hat. None of these objects is glamorous. Each one is a promise that, in weather, the human hand will not be reduced to wishing tarps, when chosen with the right kind of patience, are not blue flags of surrender but quiet, temporary roofs. The island prefers the heavier weave, the kind that drapes with weight and does not fray into confetti at a rude edge of zinc. Grommets matter. The cheap kind tear, the reinforced kind hold their manners, the rope passes cleanly, and the knot returns when asked. Rope, too, is selected with the same domestic I brought to linens, a size that holds a bowline without sulking, a braid that forgives wet hands, a length that reaches from ridge to ground with a little generosity left over. In the dry weeks, a top is unfolded once on the grass, inspected like a new map, its corners labelled with a marker, north, south, street side, mango side, in letters large enough to read while the air thinks loudly about rain. Then it is folded back not in a panic shape, but in a square that will open in the right direction without a wrestling match on a windy day. The act of covering is itself a geometry lesson the island teaches gently. Water travels by edge, gravity, capillary, habit. A top that lies smug and flat will collect a small lake that will eventually want to travel somewhere with enthusiasm. A top tented with a forgiving ridge will shed like a polite tin roof. The anchor points do not ask nails to pierce grommets. They ask for a short length of smooth stick, a toggle, tied behind the grommet with a clove hitch so that the load spreads across the fabric and the knot can be untied by a damp, tired hand later. Lines do not travel over sharp zinc edges. An old length of hose or cloth wraps the place where rope greets metal, a friendship brokered beforehand by someone who has learned that chafe writes long, sad paragraphs if ignored. The top does not try to act as a sail. It tucks under leeward rafters. It listens to the wind's direction. It becomes a temporary, obedient skin rather than a flag with opinions for windows and doors. The repair kit prefers the language of latches and weather strip to the shout of nails. A small bag of stainless screws, a hand brace or drill with the bits that match the house's habits, spare hasps that mirror the ones already in service, and rolls of adhesive-backed foam that teach a stubborn louver to close without invention. These are the tools that turn a draft into a confession. Thin plywood panels cut in the dry months to the sizes penciled on their backs wait like patient assistants. The panel for the bathroom's small window knows its bath N. The panel for the back hall's tall louver knows its hall W. A handful of furring strips, pre-drilled, live in the same corner. They press those panels home without asking walls to wear scars when the season ends. The ground-level cast includes the small saboteurs of calm, loose nails, screws, splinters, glass. A magnet on a stick, either bought or made of a salvaged speaker magnet taped to a broom, has saved more tires and feet than any sermon about shoes. After Gust's practice at the edges of night, the morning swish of the magnet through gravel, along the foot of the fence, and across the driveway becomes an island ritual. The clicking sound of captured steel is the music of future errands unspoiled by punctures. Work gloves, chosen not for their brand but for their fit, become second skins, thin enough to feel a washer, thick enough to forgive the corner of a zinc sheet that believes it is a teacher. Boots with honest soles and no fantasy about being sandals live by the door. They go out before breakfast on days when the yard tries to be a cabinet of curiosities underfoot. Cutting tools are a subject the island approaches with respect, not romance. A handsaw that cuts on the pull or the push, whichever the household prefers, stays sharper than memory if it is wiped after salt air. A pruner whose pivot screw actually tightens. A lopper that learns the diameter of branches it can truly manage. And a small folding saw that owes more to patience than to biceps. These tools make the work of clearing branches a lesson in angles rather than in force. Chainsaws, if they join the cast, come with their entourage. Chaps that make legs less vulnerable to distraction, goggles that make eyes independent of wind, ear protection that lets thought remain civilized. Bar oil is laid in like tea. Chain tension is treated like punctuation. Accurate, checked often, never left to improvisation. And the first rule of chainsaws, repeated like a prayer, they do not wake until after the storm sleeps. No roof is made safer by a blade arguing with a gust. Fasteners are little diplomats. Screws, not too long and not too few, sit sorted in tins whose lids bite closed and whose labels match the work. Roofing with washers. Wood to wood. Masonry anchors. The bright stainless ones for places where salt licks. Washers themselves are small saints. They spread loads, spare wood, speak fluent roof. Nails still have their poetry. Ring shank where tradition says so, galvanization where tradition once forgot, a small bag of panel pins for tidy work that would prefer not to be scolded later by rust. A box of plastic shims, a gift to the impatient, teaches doors and windows to remember square without begging a chisel to move into the room. Sealants and patching have their own shelf. A good exterior caulk that doesn't sulk in humidity. A tube of roofing cement that forgives a wet edge. A strip of butyl tape that knows how to stick between a flap of metal and a conscience. A roll of flashing tape that adheres like a well-argued essay. These are not permanent philosophies. They are bridges to the artisan who will visit when the sky returns to being a proper blue and the island's carpenters catch their breath. Used properly, clean substrate, no rush where a rush would make trouble, edges rolled down. They prevent small leaks from becoming stories. And because products sleep badly on damp shelves. The house keeps them sealed in a box inside another box, with a foolishly large rubber band that remembers its duty when lids forget theirs inside. The mending takes on a quieter character, little splints for furniture feet, felt and a screw. A pot metal latch bent back with a small crescent wrench and persuaded to be decent. A drawer runner that receives a kiss of candle wax and decides to behave even when the air makes would want to be larger than itself. A tube of wood glue with its tip kept clear by the ancient trick of a nail pushed into its nose. Clamps that are more like gentle hands than like vices. The doctrine is not to fix everything now. The doctrine is to fix the necessary so the house remains polite to those who live in it while the season finishes its speech. Ladders make their speech too. Angle, footing, helper. They stand on ground that has been spoken to with a broom first, lest a pebble tell an ankle a story it won't forget. They are held by another person with a hand that is present, not merely placed. A tool belt that doesn't drop screws like confetti makes the ascent a conversation rather than a commute. If the ladder must visit the roof, It is tied at the top, not a complicated knot, just a promise, so that coming down is as certain as going up. And because everything heavy is twice as heavy after noon in damp heat, the ladder goes to bed early. Work that would be brave at 4 is wise at 9. Lighting is part of small repairs too. A cheap shop light that sips from a power bank. A string of little LEDs with a battery pack that does not fuss. A flashlight clipped to a pocket with its beam angled at the work. These lights turn later into now, not by dramatizing the scene, but by making shadow into shape. Headlamps are loaned to neighbors without ceremony. Nothing in the island's economy yields compound interest like lending light. And the public square of the yard. The art of bundling becomes an act of beauty. Branches are cut to lengths that hands and municipal trucks both respect. The twine that ties is biodegradable, because the island thinks a year past today as naturally as it thinks an hour past now. Piles sit not on the soft roots of trees but on the hardened apron where a pickup can float with them without sinking. Nails harvested by the magnet are trapped in a jar with a screw-on lid so they cannot rehearse an escape. Broken glass is fed to a bucket with a lid, not to a bag that dreams of tearing at the worst possible moment. The driveway, when it is clear, is swept, not because the house is fussy under weather, but because a clean threshold convinces the mind it lives in a place that still knows how to welcome. Morning comes the way it always does on the islands, even after a noisy night. Low light folding itself along verandas, roosters testing their voices, zinc easing from drumroll to hush. The house has done its work. Now comes the gentler craft of looking, slowly, in order, with the courtesy that keeps small dangers from trying to act big. Post-storm is not a parade. It is a walking list, read aloud in the tone of someone counting shells. The door opens a hand's width first. The air smells of wet leaves and the metallic clean that lingers after rain argues with zinc. Listen before stepping. Branches still learning gravity, a loose sheet finding its last remarks, the hiss of a line that ought to be quiet. Shoes with honest soles go on, not because puddles ask for fashion, but because nails and glass like to practice camouflage in new sunlight. A torch rides in a pocket even at breakfast. Shadows remain in places the sun will not reach until later. The first rule is patience with wires. Anything that droops like a tired rope is treated like a snake that doesn't give interviews. No touching, no hero auditions, no just to move it off the road. Lines belong to the people who know their moods. Calls belong to you. A note goes in the pocket notebook, line down by breadfruit, called at 7:18. The second rule is patience with water you cannot see. A road that looks like a shallow conversation may hide a pothole rehearsing opera. Cars wait. Feet, if they must go, try with a stick, not a guess. The house gets its greeting in a circle, not a zigzag. Start with the roofline from the ground. Eyes trace ridges and laps, looking for a cap that blinked, a sheet that learned a new wave, a patch that asked to retire. Gutter mouths confess quickly. Leaves pressed like fans where hands will later persuade them apart. Downspout extensions are checked, still pointing away, not shyly folded back on themselves. Sandbags sit where punctuation was needed. If a comma slid, it is nudged back with the toe, not shouldered into position like furniture. Walls tell their stories in stains and seams. Hairline cracks that were old friends remain exactly that. Anything new and eager gets a pencil tick, the smallest kind of archaeology. We see you. We will check after tea. Windows that wore their plywood like winter coats are thanked, then left dressed until the all-clear feels like a sentence with a period, not a comma. Doors that swelled in the long humidity accept their planed wedges. No one argues them into pride at 8 a.m. A latch that worked loose sleeps under a strip of tape for an hour while stronger tasks go first. Inside, the walk continues at floor level. Floors that rehearsed being shallow creak shine, then mat under a mop's patient script. The house writes itself back into the present tense. Water toward the threshold, bucket toward the step, towel to the sun and the lemon in its wash. The safe room edges carry no drama. Mattresses lift a lean, sheets find their breeze. The table returns to being a table and not a small command bridge. Thermoses pour what warmth remains. Kettles sing if the grid has manners or the gas remembers its job. Children eat first and slowly. Rooms that have watched weather like a film prefer the digestion of quiet. Food makes its own set of decisions without guilt. The refrigerator door opens as if it were visiting a patient. Short appointments, clear purpose. Anything that spent too long warming becomes a neighbor's stew today or a polite goodbye. Freezers that kept their temper are allowed to keep it. A hand tests texture at the surface of a bottle brick and nods approval. Ice coolers exchange civilities. One household surplus becomes another's evening comfort. What can be cooked now is cooked now. New electricity, when it returns, likes a light workload, not a festival. Documentation wears its tidy hat after tea. Photos are taken with the calm of a librarian. Roof from four corners, from the ground. The shy drips trace on the ceiling. The chalk line outside that earned a sibling last night. Not for social display. For memory and for the adjuster who prefers numbers to adjectives. Receipts for tarps, for screws, for the bit of hose that kept rope kind, into a sleeve. Names of helpers, small favors given and received, onto the same page. This is the small economics of recovery, and it adds up softer than money. Neighbors fold into the day like sunlight along fences. The first question is always the same and arrives like a friendly tide. All good. A thumbs up acknowledges the overnight texts that promise the same. A nod points to a limb that needs two hands. A grin says the rooster is a comedian. Elders are visited with their preferred cadence. No fuss. Chairs angled to match the porch at home. A cup that tastes of normal. Medications counted. A new battery threaded into the radio. The door checked where it always pretends to stick. Pets greet across the lane like diplomats. Their water bowls stop trying to float. Tools earn their breakfast. The magnet on a stick sweeps drive and path. Its clicking inventory is both satisfaction and prevention. The pruner learns the grammar of leverage. Dead fronds are invited down gently. Banana leaves persuaded to stop auditioning for flight. Chainsaws, if they join the scene, do so in full daylight, at shoulder height or below, on wood that behaves, never on a roof, never in a gust that still thinks it has lines. Goggles and chaps are not theatre. They are how the island keeps errands going tomorrow. Brush is bundled at lengths the truck understands. The twine remembers to be biodegradable because the island cares about next season even while wiping this one's brow. Water returns to its civic responsibilities. The first flush diverter is entered and reset. The rainhead screen receives its brushing. The cistern lid is checked for manners. If a boil water advisory visits the radio with its sensible voice, the household nods. It is already rehearsed. A pot that knows its boil. A timer that knows 3 minutes without needing to be watched. Bottles that appreciate the diplomacy of a funnel. Bleach writes its quiet math. Drops for making water friendly. A splash for floors. A stronger sentence for the entry where boots forgot to be perfect. Air is invited back into the house in stages. Louvers return to their familiar angles. Doors learn to stay without drafts. The small fan reminds rooms of their old habit of turning. Wet cloth things, curtains hems, a rug corner that flirted with a puddle, are lifted into sun and breeze. Mildew is told, nicely, that the show is over. Mosquitoes, delighted by new sources of sky, are denied their matinee. Containers tipped, nets shaken and hung. Repellent becomes a chorus. The day is not a campaign. It is a sequence of courtesies to avoid tomorrow's annoyance. Power returns, or not, with its usual shyness. When it does, it is greeted like a guest. Breakers on in order, big loads last, the refrigerator invited first, the rest in pairs. Surge protectors are reset. A glance at the calendar reminds the house to replace the tired ones next month. Generators, if they were kind in the night, are thanked properly. Oil checked, fuel managed, extension cords coiled back into polite circles, exhaust still and never near doors. If power is still out, nothing is urgent that wasn't urgent at 3 a.m. Lanterns and routines carry rooms easily through a second evening. Roads and paths ask for discipline rather than bravado. The community net whispers its updates at reasonable intervals. Which clinic is open? Which shelter kept breakfast? Which lane awaits the line crew? Rumors that try to gallop are given a stable and a slow feed. We'll wait for the 9 and the 3. Photos that should go to the works ministry go. Photos that only stir feelings stay. Children help with inventories and with the ceremonial release of a bucket brigade that, gloriously, won't be needed today. By afternoon, the island is itself again, just a little saltier, a little wiser. The notebook earns 2 lines. First light walk, all sound. Limb by gate cleared. Called in line by breadfruit. The house has no appetite for triumph. It prefers accuracy. Shutters open to hand. Braces will rest until the season says otherwise. The leek that thought about starting was charmed into changing its mind. Tea at 4 tastes like a small holiday, the kind that arrives not because calendars insist but because rooms feel newly honest. Evening carries its inventory of thanks. A text to the neighbor who held the ladder. A jar of something to the cousin whose freezer sang through the night. A note set aside for the radio announcer who kept his voice shaped like reassurance. The tools, dry and content, return to their hooks and boxes. The towels launder. The sandbags nap where commas rest between clauses. Tomorrow there will be new work, tidying, a small purchase, perhaps a call to a roofer to schedule a look next week when hammers have slept. But tonight, the house breathes with the old rhythm again. Sea, wind, cricket, kettle. First light did what it always does on the islands after a blow. It turned threat back into maintenance. It turned noise back into chores. It turned storm back into weather. The island measures recovery not by headlines, but by errands. After a blow, the return of ordinary transactions is like tide coming back into a mangrove. Patient, many-fingered, each finger carrying a small life. The first clue isn't a grand reopening. It's a rattle of a steel shutter at the corner shop, a broom's rasp on the concrete, the familiar clink of bottles answering each other as if clearing their throats. Markets, petrol stations, hardware counters. These are stages where the play of normalcy begins its second act, softly. With a caste in work shirts and shoes that have known puddles, morning writes its lists, and the lists are modest. Rice enough for 3 days, batteries if they're there, bread if the bakery's old oven remembered how to breathe, a packet of yeast if it didn't. At the little grocery, the light returns first as daylight. Even before the mains remember themselves, the owner lifts shutters halfway, not for drama but to let air learn the aisles again. A sign appears in neat marker, cash, please, and, below it, an apology to cards and to the small rectangle of glass that keeps time and tells stories when Signal remembers. The queue outside is friendly but honest. Everyone reads the shelves with their inside voices. No one tramples the jam. Want and need take their turns like polite cousins. Cash moves like careful water, one note at a time. People have kept small bills in envelopes with modest names. Shop, petrol, bread. Because storm weeks are not kind to change drawers and card networks. Prices do not leap if the shopkeeper can help it. If they must adjust, they do it with a pencil and a sigh, not with a trumpet. When someone is short by a coin or two, the queue becomes a pocket. Leave it. I have, says a voice near the back, and a dull coin that has slept in a dashboard learns a purpose. The island's economy, for a day or two. Looks like it did when radios were new and rumors were slower. Ledger books, handwriting. A nod that means I know you across 20 years of errands. The bakery's door. When it opens, smells like a sermon. Flour, heat, and a promise that patience can be eaten on a plate with butter. Bread loaves where the islands calm like caps, a little darker where the ovens argued with humidity, scored with the baker's old knife that has forgotten to be straight, perfectly imperfect. There is no hoarding. Not because anyone posted signs, but because hunger can count, and generosity can, too. Rolls go into wax paper, not bags that fly. A few extra ride in a bag that knows which neighbor didn't bake this morning because the roof took their attention. The baker's radio, small, stubborn, sits beside the flour bin, reporting the clinic's hours with the same tone it uses to speak of swells and shear. Out back, someone hammers a loose piece of fascia. Inside, someone dabs a damp corner with a cloth. The line pretends not to see either, the way the island pretends not to notice a person smoothing their hair after wind. Fuel is a different theatre, and it asks for choreography. Stations open with cones laid like punctuation, commas to turn a queue into a line that doesn't argue with traffic, periods to keep pumps from drowning in their own importance. A handwritten board says the rules plain: limit per vehicle, jerrycans after cars, no cutting, bring cash if the network sulks. Attendants were the faces of diplomats. They have been through this and through worse, and they know the difference between a customer who needs and a customer who simply wants. When a nurse's small car appears, the queue tilts like a school of fish making way for something both ordinary and essential. A pickup with a generator in the back, the kind that kept a neighbour's insulin honest through the night, earns its gallons without commentary. The talk is low. No one ethics lectures. The social math does itself. Hardware counters become confessional booths and minor universities. On storm weeks, a 5-gallon bucket is not just a bucket. It's currency, architecture, and philosophy. The clerks know where the good tarps live and where the cheap ones apologize. They steer people toward washers that will make tomorrow's leak smaller, rather than toward the shiniest thing on the pegboard. Screws are bought not by the exact count on the plan, but by the handful that accounts for dropped ones, strip ones. The one the nephew will lose in the grass at 3 p.m. stories get traded between bins of hinges and tubes of sealant. The last time it came from West. My gallery remembered it. Use butyl under the lap. Tape after. If you must cut zinc today, give the edge something kind to live with. None of it is gossip. All of it is the island's peer-reviewed literature. The slow return of errands has a sound, and it is not a siren. It is the clap of a domino on a table dragged back to the shop's shady spot. It is the wobble squeak of a bicycle whose chain would like oil but still carries a message across the lane. It is the phone of the woman who knows which nurse works mornings at the clinic and which evenings at the shelter. Yes, bring him at 2. Yes, the blood pressure machine is awake. It is the regular exhaustion of a receipt roll, torn and handed over with the small apology of a person who has not had coffee yet. It is the rumor that fails to take root because the radio's 3 p.m. bulletin arrives on time like rain in November, and people trust its grammar more than the internet's excitement. School, even before formal classes begin again, opens its yard for small, important reasons. A distribution of water that tastes like policy and courtesy. A rack of chargers tied to a generator that hums behind the office window. A pile of donated clothes sorted by someone with eyes for dignity. No small. Medium, large, but for tall girl with skinny arms, for a man who lifts things. For auntie with the nice hat. Children show up from habit and find a purpose. Counting, stacking, handing, learning the arithmetic of enough in a way few textbooks manage. Teachers, those quiet logisticians of normal life, keep a notebook of who needs a call and who needs a visit. They have always been the island's emergency planners, just with chalk instead of a badge. Boats enter the supply conversation early where they always do. Small craft carry ice, bags of rice, a box of medicine, a sack of bolts that finally made the ferry, an outboard part wrapped in oil paper like a ceremonial gift. Skippers are called by their first names and their fathers' names. Money is not always the first conversation. Ocean debts and favours have their own ledgers. In coves where roads behave like suggestions, the first reopened road is sometimes water, and the first delivered item is often not grand, a spool of line, a bag of chicken feed, a new gasket for a pump that this morning learned how to sulk. If the sea is still testing its voice, those deliveries wait a day. No one risks a skiff in slop for pride. Risk takes weekends. Recovery works weekdays. Tourism, which on ordinary days pays for 100 quiet groceries, tiptoes. Hotels put human voices ahead of bookings. Owners walk corridors, knocking softly, all right in there. Visitors learn the island's real language, the one of porch checks and hand radios and pots shared over fences. Some leave. Some stay to help. Most, whatever they choose, write kindness into reviews that will disappear into algorithms but remain, on the island, as the memory of strangers who saw the backstage and didn't complain. The vendors by the beach replace umbrellas with brooms. The first morning after, they sweep sand back to the sea, not because it needs them, but because sweeping is a kind of saying we are still here. Errands return with etiquette. The hours become known, and they are respected. If the petrol station says 7 to 3, nobody arrives at 2:58 with a tank like a drum and a voice like a trumpet. If the hardware store posts 2 tarps per household, friends do not become households by imagination. They become delivery help, extra hands for the wait. Witnesses to the instruction, tie to structure, not to hope. The island knows that bending rules feels clever in the moment and miserable in the afternoon when someone else finds a closed sign where a queue should have been. So the politeness that governs domino tables governs diesel queues. Next is next. Patience is quicker than anger. Heat is the enemy. Drink water. Shade is kindness. Move the line, and always, there are the little trades. Someone with a freezer still dreaming of Antarctica swaps a bag of ice for a roll of tape that won't sulk. Someone with battery to spare hosts a phone charging picnic on the gallery. Someone whose bread rose twice by accident leaves a bag on the neighbor's step with a note that says for your tea. A child sets up an honesty table with limes from the yard. Adults pay for the joy of the sign written in green crayon. A mechanic looks at a generator's carburetor and does the tiny magic of cleaning without a lecture. The generator thanks everyone by starting on the second pull. The island remembers that its supply chain begins in these courtesies and only later becomes warehouses and trucks. By late afternoon, errands have shown their limits and their sufficiency. You did not buy every screw, but you bought the right ones. You didn't fill every can, but you filled the one that mattered. There is bread on the table, not cake. There is, somehow, a bit of cake in the taste of the bread. The counter at the shop holds a small jar for a line cruise coffee. Coins ring with the happy tone of civic gratitude. The radio says the water plant wants another hour. The island gives it. The sun says enough in the long angle it casts across pavements washed free of leaves. The broom leans. The shutter lowers. The list for tomorrow gains 3 items and loses 5. Normal isn't back, but its errands are, and that is close enough for sleep. Clean up after weather is not a battle. It's a negotiation, quiet, methodical, and kind to backs and futures. On Caribbean islands, the day after is when the street begins to look like itself again. Not because trucks roared like heroes, but because hands, many, ordinary, patient, taught chaos to stand in lines. Debris becomes categories. Categories become bundles. Bundles become departures. The grammar of recovery is tidy. Nouns, wood, metal, green waste, verbs, stack, tie, label, and punctuation, cones, chalk, notes. The aim isn't speed. It's clarity, so that neighbors, haulers, and tomorrows you can read what today wrote without squinting. Green waste goes first because it forgives the weather's moods. Branches are cut to lengths that a person can lift without deciding to be young again. The lopper talks in inches, not bravado. The handsaw nods to knots and lets them have their say. Piles are tied with twine that will return to the soil politely. Coconut fronds, broad as opinions, are stacked with their spines aligned so they behave like a book instead of a flock. Banana leaves shrink in the sun and sulk if left loose. They prefer bundles that don't learn to travel in a gust. Where municipal guidance exists, it becomes household style, 4-foot lengths, tied, the island's choreography for the truck's predictable arms. Piles sit where trucks can flirt from the road without sinking. Not on the soft roots of the mango that already did yesterday's kind service by staying vertical. Would that used to be something? Fence. Fascia, a brave little shed, gets its own republic. Nails are invited out by the back of a hammer or by the day's favorite miracle, the magnet on a stick that clicks like a Geiger counter for mischief. Boards with teeth become boards with smiles. Edges that could disagree with a calf are planed by sand or wrapped with tape until disposal day. Zinc sheets, those sharp birds, are stacked with cardboard or old towels between them, their corners bent under like tucking in bedclothes so the wind cannot teach them to fly. Rope and straps keep stacks domestic. If a sheet is too ambitious for one back, it learns humility under 2 hands or waits for 3. Nothing heavy is noble afternoon. Metals confess their nature by sound. A bucket becomes percussion when moved and therefore finds its metal cousins behind the gate. Bent gutter, a bicycle rim that lost an argument, an ancient hinge that decided to retire during the squall. Aluminum and steel often have different fates in the island's second life. Sorting them now is a love letter to the person who will cart them later. Sharp smalls, screws, shards, go into a jar with a lid that won't audition for escape. Glass that pretended to be invisible becomes loud in the right bucket. Rigid walls, a closing top, a label that says glass in letters that can be read from a moving truck. Cardboard, where dry, earns a second career as interleaf and signage. Where wet, it becomes tomorrow's regret if not sent on its way quickly. Soft things tell the truth more slowly. Rugs that kissed puddles have 24 hours to tell you whether they intend to be forgiven. Sun, breeze, and salt in the air make quick work of minor indiscretions. Anything sour after a day of kindness becomes a goodbye. Curtains' hems dry like pages on a rail. If they still whisper mildew by evening, a wash with a splash of vinegar in honest water either saves them or offers closure. Mattresses that met more than a trace of water are not candidates for optimism. They are heavy optimism machines that lie to spines. A chalk note on the curb, mattress, wet, is not drama. It's a courtesy to hands that will lift it later, and to neighbours who will not wonder whether it wandered off the gallery. Muck is not the enemy. Apathy is. Floors are maps. A squeegee's long lines send yesterday toward the door. A bucket's rinse becomes a small river. Bleach writes its quiet math. So many caps in a bucket for floors, but never a marriage of bleach and ammonia, because that couple throws terrible parties. Sponges give up their careers for a week. Cloths that survive boiling become the staff. Mops retire by noon if they live in dirty water. A second bucket is cheaper than pretending the first got cleaner by thinking about it. Shoes that worked outdoors do not cross thresholds without a shallow bath. A tray lined with gravel and a splash of diluted bleach turns a doorway into a customs desk where souls declare their intentions. Mold auditions fast in warm air. The island knows the prevention catechism, airflow, sunlight, and the honest admission that some things are not worth the argument. Closets stand with mouths open. Drawers ease their lungs by staying a crack proud. A fan does not fight humidity. It moves it along. Vinegar, the humble poet of the cabinet, wipes down shelves before a single green thought appears. Silicone packs saved from showboxes finally have their day if a drawer insists on nostalgia's perfume. Where mold won a corner after last season, this season gets a brush with a stronger sentence. Diluted bleach for tile and masonry. Never for porous with it prefers to be courted with soap, sun. And patience, road edges and drains receive diplomacy, not force. Everyone wants the water to go away. No one wants to send it to a neighbour. Culverts are persuaded open with gloved hands and tools that understand leverage. A rake, not a spear. A shovel, not a crusade. Silt has its own weather. Move it slowly, and it behaves. Fling it, and it promises to return after the next shower as a complaint in a new place. Where the community has agreed on roles, this one checks the corner grates. That one the school culvert. The morning looks like competence. Not like 12 people discovering a single shovel at once. Fires are not the solution the week teaches. Burning green waste in a breeze that still remembers how to be rude is a memo to the fire service that says, please scold us. Smoke finds lungs that have already worked a long conversation with humidity. Where burning is lawful and later, dry, still, permitted, ashes return to soil at the edge of a bed, not to the drain that wishes to pass water, not soup. Compost begins in the corner with the oldest leaves. Food scraps, if pests are a local politics, stay out of that discussion. The island keeps rats and rumours out of open invitations. Household chemistry stays humble. Fuel cans live far from sweepers and far from doors. Lids teach children and tired adults the satisfying click of closed. Paints and solvents that spilled their curiosity in a fall are corralled. Not with bare hands, but with absorbent that doesn't pretend to be fancy, sand. If that is the day's partner. Cat litter, if the house keeps it. Commercial socks if the island sells them at the hardware. Anything that might one day demand the word hazardous receives a phone call to the right place, not a shrug that ends at the ditch. Communication choreographs even this: chalk on a bin lid, metal. Tape on a bundle, green, 4 feet. A note on the gate, call if truck needs access, working out back. Groups chat without chatty rumors, truck came by the top lane. Team finishing at clinic, hardware sending tarps at noon. The radio's 3 p.m. voice speaks like a foreman who remembers everyone's name. Pickup schedules. Boil water updates. Which hill gets a grader tomorrow? The island writes it in notebooks as if these were recipes worth keeping, because they are. Children and elders receive jobs that are not pretend. Little ones count ties for bundles, stick thank you labels on water bottles for line crews, and arrange the salvage domino table for evening morale. Elders supervise shade and breaks, tell the story of the year the breadfruit dropped a limb through the shop awning, and call time on ladders when the sun's angle becomes a lecture. Nobody becomes a martyr. Muscle strains are not commemorative plaques. Gloves mean tomorrow's jar can open without theatre. Hats mean the afternoon arrives as a friend instead of a judge. Pets learn the edges again. Dogs re-sniff a yard that smells like new paragraphs. Cats redraw their maps of high ground. Chickens find their coop drier than yesterday, and their feed stays in bins with lids that promise to argue with raccoons. Standing water in the cap of a bucket, in a folded top shallow pocket, in the saucer under the hibiscus. These small invitations to mosquitoes are declined with a flick. Nets return to windows like the old songs in evening. Practical lullabies that make rooms plausible again. By late afternoon. Debris has transformed from everything out of place into things in the right cues. The curb looks like a catalogue. The yard looks like a poem that someone has begun to edit with love. Inside, floors are honest, air is moving, and the radio speaks of tomorrow as if it were already on the gallery, barefoot and curious. The notebook earns 3 lines, green tide. Zinc stacked with cardboard. Magnet sweep done. Tea carries the taste of sawdust and lemon and the little victory of a palm that did not fall. The island falls back into its evening. Dominoes, a laugh, a soft check of the horizon. Debris did not defeat order. It enrolled in it. And tomorrow, because the bundles tell trucks where to go and the notes tell neighbors what was done, the street will look like itself again, almost as if wind had only been a visitor with loud shoes. After the first days of sweeping and bundling, the island enters its long conversation with mending. Not the quick fixes that keep rain outside, those were done already. But the accurate ones, repairs that ask for ladders, decisions, signatures, and the kind of patience that feels like work even when no hammer is swinging. Here, preparedness becomes protection of a different kind, guarding wallets and timelines, guarding trust, guarding the house from the hasty cure that becomes a second wound. The morning begins with assessment, and assessment begins with quiet. A chair on the gallery, a notebook, a slow walk of the eyes across eaves, ridge, walls, sill, steps. Noticing is cheaper than assumptions. Roof first. Are ridge caps still polite? Do laps lie down like a well-made bed? Or has one corner learned to lift and gossip with the wind? Where a patch was placed in a hurry, does it deserve promotion to a proper flashing, or has it earned retirement and a thank you? From the ground, binoculars make poets of the cautious. From the attic, a torch traces the rafter's story in knots and shadows. Walls next. Hairline cracks that have lived here for years keep their passports. New ones get a pencil tick and a date, then a second look after lunch to see if they grew. Most don't when the sun returns. Doors and windows. Planed edges meet frames like grown-ups who remember their manners. Latches are shy or certain. Louvers hold their slats without needing props. Permits and rules step onto the stage with their own soft shoes. The island's building office, sometimes a person, sometimes a small room with a big ledger, speaks the language of materials and setbacks and weights that roofs can bear. Storm weeks tempt people into treating code as a villain. Wiser minds treat it as the memory of every roof that flew and every wall that tried to stand alone. A call is made. What work needs a permit? What can be repaired in kind? Who signs off on same as before and who must bless stronger than before? The answer is often simpler than rumor says. A small drawing on ruled paper, a fee paid in the morning, a stamp that looks like a seal from a sailor's passport. Bureaucracy here is often just a habit of writing down things the island has already learned the hard way. Contractors arrive in seasons like birds, some known, some new, some wearing plumage too shiny for their own credibility. The first offense against the wrong bird is a list of names you wrote before the sky went loud. The roofer who fixed a ridge in May, the mason who reset a step in March, the carpenter who never promises noon and always arrives at 10 to 9. In storm season, good people are busy. That's not a red flag, it's a signpost. Estimates talk in complete sentences. Scope, materials, timeline, cost, what the owner will do, what the crew will do, what happens if the weather changes its mind again. A handshake is lovely. A page is kinder. Pay a little to begin, the rest when we check the work in the sun. That's an island proverb worth writing on the fridge. If a price is too low to be true, it asks you to pay twice. Once now, once later to someone else. Scams think they are clever. The island is cleverer. Cash up front for the whole job. No, thank you. A crew that refuses to name a local supplier who knows them by first name? No, thank you. A business card without a number that answers or a truck with magnetic signs that look freshly peeled from a printer's warm tray. Slow down. Ask a neighbor if the name rings true. Insurance adjusters, those hesitant diplomats who speak both house and ledger, have their tempo. They like photos with dates, estimates with material spelled out, receipts that smell like tar and not perfume. They dislike aggression and adore patience. The middle path makes the check move. Follow up without nagging. Document without drama. Write the claim number big. Keep a folder that closes with a satisfying click. Materials are half the repair. And their habits are as distinctive as islands on a chart. Zinc, galvanized or the vanilla of galvalume, enjoys proper fasteners with washers that lie like simple halos. Screws at the crown of the corrugation, not the valley where water walks. Butyl or mastic underlaps so rain learns a polite detour. Tile, clay or concrete, wants its clips, mortars that don't daydream in humidity, flashing that tucks under and over in exactly the right order. Timber listens to fasteners more than speeches. Stainless where salt licks. Treated where termites write love letters. Connections that triangulate forces rather than asking a single lonely screw to pretend to be a hero. Every house knows its own dialect. In one village, hurricanes convinced people to love ring-shank nails. In another, everyone switched. To screws like a family converts to a new cricket. Team after a long drought of winds, temporary covers, tarps. That hummed through the night like low drums. Move gracefully offstage when the real roof arrives. They are dried, folded, labeled, and thanked. They are not asked to become permanent. Tarps are romantic partners, not spouses. The geometry of a proper patch includes trim that hides nails from wind's curiosity. Sealant that understands its job is to stick to clean, dry surfaces and be left alone. Not to be put on like icing whenever someone feels underdressed. A little primer and paint on exposed edges is not vanity. It's future time purchased at discount. Scheduling becomes the spine of sanity. Instead of a single Everest of fixed roof, the notebook collects hills. Order fasteners by Friday. Call Miss Ruth to ask who trimmed her breadfruit without drama. Check attic at noon for any warm leaks. Install downspout extension 2 feet longer to read the new grade. The list is not a prison. It's a map. Slow work done in the right order changes the day's weather. An hour with a brush in the gutter saves a weekend with a mop in the bedroom. A half day helping a neighbor earns a second pair of hands when your ladder wants a friendly shoulder. Community again, inevitably and fortunately. The person who knows the permit clerk's name is worth more than a spare drill battery. The cousin with a pickup makes supply run smoother. The auntie who's fed linemen since '96 knows when their break happens and where the queue will be shortest at fuel. A WhatsApp group that keeps rumors out and details in. Vendor restock times. clinic hours, which aisle at the hardware hides the good hose clamps, becomes a civic service. The unglamorous hero of the week is the whiteboard on the porch, today's shopping written in blunt letters that remind anyone headed out what to pick up if they pass the shop. Hashtag 10-tech screws, 1 inch. Washers, bleach X2, limes. Fair repair respects bodies, 2. No one roofs at noon if there is any other hour in the day. No one carries a sheet of zinc in gusts. No one drills with arms extended on a ladder because that's how shoulders decide to rehearse their biography. At 3 a.m. gloves protect not only skin but tomorrow's patients. Goggles keep a day from turning into a clinic visit over a shaving of metal that believed it was a story. Shoes with honest soles make jobs shorter because they prevent rework. Slipping is the enemy of straight lines. And straight lines are how water learns to leave, money. Always a measured guest. Sits at the table for every decision. 3 quotes, apples to apples, with fruit labelled. What brand of fastener, what grade of lumber, what kind of flashing, what, crucially, is being left for later. Cheaper now may mean a roof that raises questions in the first proper squall of next season. Expensive now may be merely ornamental when a simpler solution would have achieved peace. The island's best craftsmen and craftswomen have a habit of answering a price question with a drawing in the dust. If you do this, the wind will do that. If you do that, the water will behave. If you wait, you will pay twice. Drawings are worth 100 brochures. Some repairs are spiritual. Not in the religious sense, though prayers have their place on ladders, but in the way that making a thing true again changes the house's mood. A door that had learned to cough opens silently after a planed pass and a kiss of wax, and the whole room sighs. A shutter whose hinge had decided to show its age learns a new pin and stops talking in complaints. The gallery rail, tightened with a new bolt and a little washer choir, stops humming and starts listening. These are small repairs, but they are big to the mind that has slept with one ear open for a week. Administrative choreography, 2. Insurance milestones tracked without obsession. Photos filed by date and corner. Receipts scanned and backed up to a USB that lives in the go bag next to the document sleeve. A calendar reminder to revisit the attic after the next heavy shower. A sticky note to call the neighbor's roofer to say thank you. Even if you didn't use him, gratitude is networking that smells like civility instead of hustle. I in all this. There is a lesson the island relearns each season. Pace is not the enemy of progress. Panic is. The road crews will reach the far lane when they have finished the near. The line crew will string new wire when their bucket has cooled from the last sun. The hardware will get the next shipment when the ferry leaves the mouth of the river and the tide remembers to help. You can be ready. List in pencil, water in bottle, hat on head, cash small, patience large. The rest is weather, both atmospheric and human. The last chapter of the season doesn't arrive with a trumpet. It arrives with the sound of shutters opening and staying open. Morning stretches differently when the calendar's teeth are behind you. The zinc does not audition every cloud. The barometer in the hallway goes back to being a decoration that people still tap out of habit. On Caribbean islands, the end of hurricane season is not a gate slammed. It is a porch door hooked back. It is the return of airy kitchens and laundry lines that go taut with beach towels instead of tarps. The work of readiness doesn't vanish. It changes tense, from present to past, from today to next year wheel. Homes undress politely. Braces come down and lean in their labelled stack with the contentment of tools between jobs. Plywood panels, wiped and kissed with a dab of oil at their edges, return to the storeroom with their penciled names still legible. Sandbags retire like punctuation at the end of a sentence that no longer needs commas, emptied into a bed that will welcome things green, their sacks folded for one more use or thanked for service and let go. Downspout extensions coil back like snakes that behaved well all season. Water drums settle to a maintenance level, lids still tight but minds looser. Labels are refreshed because memory is enthusiastic in November and lazy in May. Pantries become cookbooks again. Rotation finds its rhythm. Tins that waited get used and replaced. Dry goods return to quantities that speak to supper, not shelter. The little bleach bottle rides back to its cleaning shelf, its laminated instruction card kept because clarity is lovely in any month. The freezer, hero of the quiet drama, hosts ice for picnics instead of thermoses. Power banks become the sort of guests who visit less often but are always invited. The open minimally note, curling at the edges, is peeled away and saved in the binder under season, finished, a memento, a smile yard shake out their fringe. Chairs wander back into sunlight. The ladder returns to the shed, tied like a promise against future fidgets. Branches that were spared for shade keep their jobs. Those that learned humility are now mulch resting under roots. Boats remember pleasure. Lines that were doubled for humility are halved for freedom. Fenders that once breathed between hull and quay become pillows for naps. A last sweep with the magnet on a stick clicks up a few late confessions from a driveway. The broom writes welcome across the gallery in long, slow strokes. Paperwork, that odd orchard of the season, offers its fruit. Claims close. A last photo is taken, the roof in good temper, the paint touched up on the fascia, the gutters lying clean like silver lines. Receipts nest in their sleeve with a courteous paid. Estimates for next year improvements get triaged into do now, do before June. Do when the cousins' crew has time. The whiteboard on the porch, that great civic instrument, keeps one list alive all year round. Off-season tasks, which are really invitations to future calm. Replace the tired surge protectors. Add one more high outlet where the modem lives. Cut new panels for the guest room windows now. Label them with the careful block letters that a sleepy person at 3 a.m. will still read. Gratitude is the island's closing ceremony. It is not a parade. It is errands done with thank yous in them. A jar of coffee at the works yard. A handwritten card slipped to the clinic nurse who returned texts after midnight. A slice of cake to the neighbor who lent the headlamp, the brace, the calm. Churches and halls host a small evening where line crew names are read like psalms, and someone tells the joke about the rooster that crowed only when a gust hit the eaves. Laughter mends the last and stitched edges of nerves. Music, which has been in the wings all season, returns to center stage, and people dance in that beautiful island way that looks like walking with rhythm while holding a plate. Because there is always food, children ceremonially graduate from this season's grade. They show the drawer of torches, all with their places. They find the go-bag hook with their eyes closed. They recite what belongs by the safe room table without peeking. A certificate may appear, a homemade one stamped with a rubber turtle or a flying fish, for calm and good sense. They file it beside report cards. And someday it will mean more than any A or B. Elders accept thanks with the shrug of people who have always known how to count roofs and kettles as blessings. Memory, in the binder and between ears, is quietly indexed for next time tourists return. The island smiles its polite, real smile. There is a touch more kindness in the way hoteliers describe shutters to guests, a little more patience in the way visitors listen. Some of them will ask about the marks on the porch pillar. They will hear about chalk and water and patience, and they will nod as if this were a museum, which in a way it is. The island sells beauty, but it keeps wisdom. Occasionally it gives a little away for free. And this is one of those occasions. And then, after a day that feels like a day before storm season and a day after, because endings and beginnings sit on the same bench, the island does what it always does. It makes tea. It stares at the horizon without trying to read it like a stranger's face. It oils a hinge that did not complain but might next year if no one spoke to it. It files the last receipt. It folds the last top. It writes one line in the notebook. Season closed, calm kept. Nothing flashy. Just accuracy, which is the island's favorite virtue. Dusk lays itself down on pastel walls. The sea argues softly with the rocks and then changes the subject. Radios return to cricket scores and the faint throb of a Friday tune. The house breathes evenly, no longer sleeping with one ear open. It will, again, when it must. But tonight, it sleeps like the patient thing it is, as the island exhales a long breath that has been waiting since June. Preparedness has done its quiet work. Readiness, for now, can rest on its shelf beside the headlamp, beneath the plant that thrives on low light, above the binder with tabs that say water, roof, neighbors, tea. The sea is not always loud. Most days it is a grammar lesson in patience and return. On these islands, hurricane readiness became family history and neighborhood choreography long before satellites learned their elegant loops. It is 1,000 small decisions made in calm: a washer under a screw, a label on a jug, a pencil line on a pillar, a radio at a civilized volume. It is shutters that speak quietly, neighbors who wave with information in the gesture, children who can find the torch and the thermos in the dark. It is the art of staying when you should, the craft of leaving when you must. The habit of returning with a broom in one hand and a thank you in the other. We have drifted through that art in 20 sleepy chapters. The hush before squalls. Wood's slow grammar. Pantry geometry. Radios and maps. Boats and yards. The community net. Roofs and gutters. Shelter calm. Quiet power. Leaving gently. The discipline of height. The courteous use of a lull. First aid as unremarkable heroism. The gentle geometry of repairs. First light. Supply lines. Debris becoming order. Fair repair. Lessons that stick. And, finally, the long exhale at season's end. None of it asks for applause. All of it asks for practice. If this quiet history helped you rest, that is fitting. Preparedness, here, is a lullaby, a rhythm of careful hands, a chorus of calm voices, the steady percussion of small tools, and the soft melody of tea poured when the radio says good night. Sleep well. The island does.